Howard Price rose before the sun, as he did every morning, and made his way down the sweeping staircase of his Los Angeles mansion. The house was large enough to echo any sound, but in the early hours it felt like a deserted museum. He lingered near a portrait of his late wife, Caroline, which hung in the entry hall. Her gentle smile was captured forever in oil paint, though in real life it had slipped from his grasp 4 years earlier. He pressed his lips together, then continued toward the kitchen. The cook, hired to prepare Howard's breakfast, had left a plate of scrambled eggs and toast on the granite countertop under a warming lamp. It was efficient, just how Howard liked everything. He ate alone, not out of preference, but out of a routine that had become deeply ingrained. This house once rang with the excited chatter of a lively couple and a young child, but it had grown eerily quiet since Caroline's passing. After breakfast, he checked the time on his phone. A text from the school principal popped up, reminding him about a meeting to discuss his daughter's increasing shyness. Charlotte was only 8, but she seemed to carry herself with the gravity of someone many years older. Ever since her mother died, she had scarcely spoken more than a handful of words to anyone besides Howard. Even with him, her sentences were short and polite. He often told himself it was just her way of grieving, and that eventually she would snap out of it. But deep down, he knew it was more complex than that. He made his way to Charlotte's bedroom. The door was ajar, revealing a tidy space dominated by pastel-colored walls and shelves of stuffed animals that remained perfectly arranged. Charlotte sat at her small desk, brushing the hair of an old doll that had seen better days. She looked up when her father knocked gently. "Good morning, sweetheart," he said, his voice soft but measured. "Ready for school?" Charlotte nodded and set the doll aside. She had her mother's eyes, dark and inquisitive. Howard felt a pang of guilt, worried he might never see those eyes sparkle the way Caroline's once did. He cleared his throat, offered a small smile, and gestured for Charlotte to follow him to the car. Moments later, they were in his sleek black sedan, rolling down the quiet streets toward her private elementary school. The morning light cast a golden haze over rows of palm trees, a typically sunny Southern California scene that clashed with the gray mood Howard carried. At school, Howard escorted Charlotte to the front door. Before letting go of her hand, he tried to catch her gaze. "I'll see you later, okay?" he said quietly. Charlotte gave a minimal nod, then walked inside without a word. Watching her tiny frame disappear into the crowd of students felt like losing sight of a fragile bird in a vast forest. Back in the car, Howard rubbed his temples, already dreading the day's responsibilities. His real estate empire had grown significantly over the past decade, but it came at the cost of endless meetings, phone calls, and property visits. Lately, he'd felt trapped between the demands of his business and his desire to be a better father. He was haunted by the sense that he was failing Charlotte, especially in the emotional realm that Caroline had once navigated so gracefully. When he arrived at his office, he was greeted by efficient staff, crisp suits, and a barrage of messages waiting for him. Among them was a note reminding him that his father-in-law had called again. Always the same stern, disapproving tone in the voicemail. "Keep your public image in line. My granddaughter deserves stability." Howard had tried to maintain a respectful relationship with the man, but there was no warmth there. His father-in-law was convinced that any change or perceived misstep would tarnish Caroline's memory. Deep down, Howard worried the older man might challenge him for custody if he deemed Howard unfit. The possibility weighed heavily on him, though outwardly he kept his composure. A few hours into the day, his phone buzzed with a message from the caretaker who looked after the house when Howard was away. The message was short and to the point. "I'm sorry, Mr. Price, but I can't keep working here. This arrangement no longer suits me." Howard stared at the words, feeling a fresh wave of tension. He had lost another domestic helper. Between the silence in his house and Charlotte's quiet distress, it seemed no one wanted to stay. He sank into the leather chair behind his desk, ignoring the stack of property contracts waiting for his signature. The polished skyline view through the window offered little comfort. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself a moment of honest reflection. If his daughter was drifting further into her own silent world, and even the household staff found the atmosphere suffocating, then something had to change. He just wasn't sure what or how. Shortly after midday, Howard stepped into the executive lounge of his real estate firm, phone glued to his ear. On the other end was his assistant, Francis, who was trying to schedule interviews for a new housekeeper. Finding someone qualified on short notice wasn't easy. He could hear the exasperation in Francis's voice as she rattled off a list of candidates. "I've reached out to over a dozen agencies," she said. "Most are either fully booked or unwilling to take on a position with the kind of hours you need. There is one candidate, though, someone named Luisa Santos. She's originally from Brazil, has experience in housekeeping and caregiving. She also mentioned experience in ballet, but that's not necessarily relevant. Should I arrange an interview?" Howard paused, the background noise of the lounge fading as his focus narrowed. Ballet, he thought. Caroline had once loved watching ballet. She would sometimes hum classical tunes in the house. He cleared his throat. "Yes, please set it up," he replied. "Let's see if we can meet with her later this week." He ended the call and strode back to his office, passing by large windows overlooking downtown Los Angeles. The city pulsed with activity, skyscrapers, traffic, and crowds of people chasing their dreams. But for Howard, life felt inert. In the elevator, he caught a glimpse of himself in the mirrored walls. Tall, stiff posture, blonde hair brushed back in a controlled style. He realized he looked perpetually tense, as though bracing for bad news. The tension continued as he returned to his desk. He dialed the school principal, who had sent another message about Charlotte's lack of engagement in class. They spoke for nearly half an hour about the upcoming school play and whether Charlotte might benefit from joining a small singing or dance ensemble. Howard listened with a growing sense of helplessness. He tried to explain that Charlotte was still grieving, but words felt inadequate. "Mr. Price," the principal said gently, "Charlotte rarely interacts with her classmates. We worry she might be slipping through the cracks. Perhaps exploring an artistic activity would help her express herself." When the call ended, Howard remained seated, gazing at the documents spread across his desk. He was used to orchestrating million-dollar real estate deals, but he felt powerless in the face of his daughter's silence. In that moment, he realized the household staff turnover was more than just an inconvenience. If Charlotte couldn't connect with any caregiver, what hope did she have of opening up at school? Just then, his phone vibrated. He glanced down, expecting another notification about business, but instead saw the name Peter Hamilton, his longtime friend and business partner. He answered with some relief. "Busy as usual, I see," Peter said in a wry tone. "I'm heading back to the office from a property visit. Got some time to talk?" "Sure," Howard replied, feeling a bit of comfort at the familiar voice. "I could use a break from the chaos." They decided to meet in a small cafe on the ground floor. Peter was the sort of man who believed in balancing business with a bit of humanity. When Howard arrived, his friend was already seated in a corner booth, stirring a cup of coffee. "Francis told me you're looking for a new housekeeper," Peter said, eyebrows raised. "Another one quit." Howard sighed, removing his jacket before sitting down. "Yes, it's the same story each time. They say the atmosphere at home is too heavy. I don't know what to do. Charlotte is hurting, and I can't fix it. Peter gave a sympathetic nod. It's understandable. Losing Caroline left a void, but you can't keep blaming yourself. Maybe this new candidate, what was her name, Louisa, will bring something different. Howard pressed his lips together. I can't keep my hopes up. The last person seemed perfect on paper too, yet she left after a couple of months. Peter set his coffee cup down. Don't let your father-in-law's expectations or your own fear of disappointment stop you from trying something new. Charlotte needs a chance to express herself. He leaned forward. And maybe you need that too. Howard's gaze flicked away, as if to dodge Peter's implication that he was emotionally closed off. Deep down, he knew there was truth in it. He'd locked himself in a mental fortress after Caroline's death, believing it was the only way to protect himself and Charlotte. But now, seeing Charlotte's struggles, he wasn't so sure that isolation was the answer. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and paperwork. As dusk approached, Howard received confirmation from Francis that Louisa Santos could interview the next morning. He leaned back in his office chair, staring at the city lights beginning to sparkle. There was a small flicker of something within him, hope, or at least curiosity, about who this Louisa might be and whether she could bring any light into his silent household. He finished the day by reviewing final notes on the new property his firm was purchasing. Then, with a weary sigh, he left the office. For the briefest moment, he pictured Caroline's laughter echoing in the corridors of their home. Tomorrow, he would meet this prospective housekeeper, and perhaps it would change nothing. Or perhaps, in a way he couldn't yet fully grasp, it might be the start of something that could help his daughter, and maybe even himself. Early the next morning, Howard felt the familiar tug of apprehension as he guided his car along the tree-lined road back to his mansion. The sun was still low, casting long shadows over the manicured lawns. He had agreed to conduct the interview with Louisa Santos at 8 o'clock sharp, but a part of him already wanted to cancel. He parked in the circular driveway, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. The hallway smelled faintly of citrus cleaner, evidence of the departing housekeeper's final duties. He glanced around, noticing the neat vacuum lines on the plush carpet. Everything looked pristine, but underneath the immaculate surface, he could almost sense an undercurrent of sorrow that had taken up permanent residence after Caroline's passing. Charlotte was still upstairs getting ready for school. Howard decided to check on her before the interview. He found her in her bedroom, staring into the mirror while smoothing the collar of her sweater. She looked up when he knocked, but her expression was guarded. "How are you feeling today?" he asked, keeping his tone gentle. She shrugged, her lips pressed in a thin line. It was the kind of response he was used to, minimal and cautious. "I'm interviewing a new helper for the house," he continued, hoping to coax a bit of interest. "Her name is Louisa. She's from Brazil. Maybe she'll be nice." Charlotte's eyes flickered with a hint of curiosity, but she said nothing. Howard gave her a reassuring smile, then reminded her they'd leave for school in half an hour. As he turned to go, he couldn't help but think about the times Caroline would have teased Charlotte, combing her hair and making silly faces until the little girl giggled uncontrollably. The absence of that warmth was palpable. Moments later, the doorbell chimed. Howard took a breath and headed downstairs. Through the glass, he saw a petite woman with curly hair swept into a low bun, holding a neatly folded resume and wearing a composed yet friendly expression. Stepping forward, he opened the door. "Mr. Price?" she asked politely. Her voice had a light accent. "I'm Louisa Santos." "Yes, please come in," he said, stepping aside. He led her to the living room, which was spacious but somewhat cold in its refined decor of leather couches and modern art pieces. While motioning her to sit, he observed her posture, straight-backed, perhaps from years of dance training, and exuding a quiet confidence. "Thank you for seeing me," Louisa began, smoothing the sleeves of her sweater. She handed him her resume. "I've been in the US for almost a year. I used to dance professionally in Brazil, but I moved here to find better opportunities and send money home to my mother." Howard skimmed the document, noting her previous experience as a caregiver for an elderly woman, housekeeping jobs in different residences, and indeed, her background as a former ballet dancer. He cleared his throat, remembering how Caroline used to love ballet. The subject felt bittersweet. He asked about her housekeeping skills, her schedule flexibility, and whether she felt comfortable caring for an 8-year-old. Louisa nodded, explaining that she had often helped with her younger cousins and that she enjoyed working with children. She seemed genuinely excited at the prospect of teaching a child music or dance, if that was ever desired. As the interview continued, Howard couldn't help noticing how Louisa's kindness shone through her eyes. Yet he felt a pang of resistance. Allowing someone so vibrant into his home might disrupt the careful solitude he and Charlotte had carved out. He was torn between wanting Charlotte to open up again and fearing the instability change could bring. Midway through their talk, Charlotte walked down the stairs, backpack slung over her shoulder. She paused upon seeing Louisa, who offered her a small, friendly smile. "You must be Charlotte," Louisa said softly. Charlotte stared at her for a moment, then gave a shy nod. Howard felt a knot in his chest. It was the first time he'd seen Charlotte look even mildly curious about a stranger. Louisa returned her gaze to Howard. "If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me anything. I know how important stability and trust are in a home." Howard hesitated. On one hand, she seemed perfect, experienced, patient, warm. On the other hand, something deep inside him balked at the idea of letting another person get close. His father-in-law's words echoed in his head about maintaining dignity and not disturbing Charlotte's fragile state. "I still have some considerations," Howard said finally. "I'll need a day or two to think it over." He glanced at Charlotte, who stood quietly near the banister. "But thank you for coming. I appreciate it." Louisa stood and handed him a neatly typed reference list. "I understand," she replied with grace. "I'm available any time if you have further questions." He led her to the door, noticing the faint trace of hope in her eyes before she departed. The house seemed to regain its stillness once she was gone. Howard turned around to see Charlotte silently watching, her expression unreadable. He knew he needed help, but something about taking this step felt monumental, and he wasn't quite ready to cross that threshold yet. That afternoon, Howard found himself standing beside a tall window in his office, gazing at the congested streets of downtown Los Angeles. He usually took pride in this view, a testament to his success in real estate, yet his thoughts were fixed on the interview with Louisa Santos. Despite his reluctance, he couldn't deny there was something genuine and refreshing about her demeanor. He turned away from the window and settled into his chair. Piles of contract proposals awaited his signature, each representing another lucrative business opportunity. But for the first time in years, his focus drifted to personal concerns. It struck him how unbalanced his life had become. He had built an empire, but was at a complete loss when it came to helping his daughter. The phone on his desk beeped, signaling an incoming call. He picked it up, half expecting it to be Francis with some new crisis. Instead, a firm, familiar voice greeted him. "Howard, it's your father-in-law," the man said without preamble. "I've just read an article about your company in the Los Angeles Business Journal. They mention your late wife in a passing reference, describing you as the devoted widower. I'm calling to remind you that your public image matters for Charlotte's sake. You must maintain a certain standard." Howard swallowed, forcing his voice to stay calm. "I understand. I'm doing what I can to keep everything in order." "Good," the older man replied. "I hope so." I wouldn't want any reason to question your ability to look after my granddaughter properly." The underlying threat lingered in the silence. Howard recalled the time, shortly after Caroline's funeral, when his father-in-law had strongly hinted he might seek custody if Howard's behavior ever seemed inappropriate. Hanging up the phone, Howard clenched his fist. He despised feeling like he had to prove himself as a capable father, especially to someone who had never shown him an ounce of true empathy. Taking a moment to compose himself, Howard dialed Francis's extension. "Any updates on that caretaker search?" "I followed up with Miss Santos," Francis replied. "She's still available and eager. Should I confirm her?" Howard paused, the memory of Louisa's warm smile coming to him. "Not yet," he said, his tone subdued. "I'll let you know by tomorrow." He spent the rest of the afternoon in meetings, reviewing spreadsheets and property analyses. By 5 o'clock, he was drained. Instead of heading straight home, he decided to pay a visit to an old friend, Mrs. Delacroix, a psychologist who had been close to Caroline. Mrs. Delacroix ran a small practice not far from Howard's office, and she occasionally offered insight into Charlotte's emotional well-being. When he arrived, the waiting room was empty. Mrs. Delacroix herself greeted him with a gentle smile. She was a woman in her 60s, with grey hair neatly pinned back. "Howard," she said, guiding him into her cozy office, "I'm glad you stopped by." He settled on a cushioned armchair. The scent of lavender and old books gave the room a comforting aura. "I wanted to talk about Charlotte," he began, running a hand through his hair. "Her school counselor is concerned she's not speaking up much. I'm at a loss." Mrs. Delacroix folded her hands in her lap. "I've seen it before. A child retreats inward when they can't find the right outlet for their grief and confusion. How is she expressing herself at home?" Howard shook his head. "She barely does. She's polite, but there's no spark in her anymore." Mrs. Delacroix studied him for a moment. "You mentioned possibly hiring a new housekeeper, someone who might also have a background in dance or something creative. Could that help Charlotte?" Howard sighed, recalling Louisa. "There is someone I interviewed today, a former ballet dancer from Brazil. She seemed kind, but I'm hesitant. My father-in-law is breathing down my neck about maintaining respectability." Mrs. Delacroix leaned forward. "Howard, your father-in-law lost his daughter. His anger and control might be his way of grieving, but you have to consider what's best for Charlotte. If this woman can bring music, creativity, and warmth into your home, isn't that worth exploring?" The words sank in slowly. Howard realized he was letting fear dictate his decisions. He had convinced himself that any disruption might harm Charlotte, yet her current life was already overshadowed by sadness. By the time he left Mrs. Delacroix's office, dusk had settled over the city. The lights of passing cars flickered on the street. He drove home in contemplative silence, recalling the faint curiosity he'd seen in Charlotte's eyes when she first met Louisa. Perhaps that small spark was precisely what she needed. When he arrived at the mansion, Charlotte was quietly finishing her homework at the kitchen table. He noticed the tension in her posture. It mirrored his own. He sat down across from her and gently inquired about her day, but she offered only a few words. The conversation fizzled into silence. He picked at the corner of a piece of mail, then finally broke the quiet. "I'm thinking about hiring that lady you met this morning, Louisa," he said, watching Charlotte's reaction. "Would that be okay with you?" Charlotte shrugged. But there was a hint of something in her eyes, like a faint light. Howard read it as acceptance, or at least not outright rejection. He nodded, feeling a small wave of relief. Yet somewhere behind that relief was a flicker of anxiety. He was on the brink of letting another person into his sealed-off world, and he couldn't quite predict what would follow. The next day, Howard found himself pacing in his study, phone in hand. He was working up the resolve to finalize his decision. The study, tucked away at the rear of the mansion, had once been a cozy library where Caroline would read to Charlotte. Now it felt more like a fortress, filled with heavy mahogany shelves and the lingering scent of old leather-bound books. He dialed Frances. "Let Mrs. Santos know that she can start on a trial basis," he said, forcing the words out. "I'll sign whatever preliminary paperwork is needed." When he ended the call, a swirl of emotions washed over him. Part of him felt relief. He was tired of the house feeling so empty, but a deeper part feared how his father-in-law might react if he decided to pry. Letting out a slow breath, he reminded himself that Charlotte's well-being came first. Louisa arrived 2 days later, suitcase in hand, ready to move into the modest but comfortable suite above the garage. Howard greeted her at the door with a polite nod. "Welcome," he said simply, stepping aside so she could enter. "Thank you," she replied, smiling. Her gaze traveled across the ornate foyer with its marble floor and high ceilings. She clutched her suitcase handle, trying to appear calm, but Howard sensed her anticipation. "It's a beautiful home." He led her to the living quarters upstairs, pointing out the kitchen, formal dining room, and the smaller family lounge. Charlotte peeked around corners, her eyes flicking to Louisa's warm expression. The child offered a small nod of greeting, then slipped back into the shadows, as if uncertain how to approach someone so new. Later that afternoon, as Howard retreated to his office to catch up on emails, Louisa began her routine by tidying the living room. She dusted the mantel where family photos were carefully arranged, Caroline holding baby Charlotte, the three of them smiling on a beach vacation, and a formal portrait from a fundraising gala. Each image told a story of a once happy household, now overshadowed by tragedy. After a while, she ventured into the kitchen to prepare a light snack for Charlotte. The girl entered timidly, having just finished her homework. "Hello, Charlotte," Louisa said softly. "How about some fruit slices?" Charlotte nodded. She didn't speak, but she took the plate and sat at the counter. Louisa gently asked if she needed anything else, but Charlotte only shrugged. Despite the silence, Louisa sensed that the girl didn't dislike her. Charlotte's eyes, though cautious, revealed a spark of curiosity. Early the next morning, Howard emerged from his bedroom and found Louisa in the kitchen, brewing coffee and humming a tune. He recognized it as a classical melody, perhaps from a well-known ballet. The notes were soft and lilting, and for an instant, Howard felt the tension in his chest loosen. "Good morning," she said, offering him a mug. He took a sip, nodding his thanks. "I heard you humming," he remarked, clearing his throat. "Do you miss dancing?" She tilted her head, considering the question. "I do, sometimes. It was my passion for many years." A gentle smile formed on her lips. "But life changes. We adapt." A part of Howard resonated with her words. He knew all too well how life could change in an instant. Before he could respond, Charlotte shuffled into the kitchen, still wearing her pajamas. Louisa looked at her warmly, offering a fresh plate of toast. "Do you like music, Charlotte?" Louisa asked tentatively. Charlotte paused, meeting her gaze. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Maybe, my mom played music before." She trailed off, her eyes dropping to the floor. Howard watched, heart clenching. It was rare for Charlotte even to mention her mother in front of a stranger. Louisa, with gentle composure, simply nodded, respecting the unspoken boundaries. As the day went on, Howard and Louisa developed an awkward yet functional rhythm. She cleaned with thoroughness and prepared simple, nutritious meals. Meanwhile, Howard juggled phone calls and emails, occasionally peering out of his study to observe. One day, he saw Louisa showing Charlotte how to neatly fold laundry, explaining in a soft voice that each item needed care and attention. Charlotte listened, nodding earnestly. By evening, Howard felt both relieved and tense. The house had a new energy, warmer than it had been in a long time, yet he remained guarded, particularly when his phone rang, displaying his father-in-law's number. He let it go to voicemail, not ready to face an interrogation about his new hire. While Charlotte was getting ready for bed, Louisa approached Howard with a careful smile. "Mr. Price, I wanted to mention that Charlotte seems quite bright. She's a bit shy, but she watches everything with such focus. Maybe, at some point, we could try some simple dance moves or exercises that might help her loosen up. Only if you agree, of course." Howard's stomach tensed at the thought of someone dancing around in the halls of this quiet mansion. For years, he'd kept the house in a static state, as though movement or music might disturb Caroline's memory. Yet Charlotte clearly needed an outlet, and part of him was beginning to suspect that movement might indeed help. "I'll think about it," he said, trying not to sound too abrupt. "For now, let's focus on getting her comfortable around you." Louisa nodded. "Of course. One step at a time." As she left him standing in the hallway, he felt the weight of his choices pressing on his shoulders. He had taken a cautious first step by hiring Louisa, but the real test was how far he would allow her influence to reach. He couldn't shake the memory of his father-in-law's warnings, nor the fear of losing Charlotte if things escalated. Yet seeing Charlotte respond, even in small ways, made him wonder if perhaps he'd done the right thing by opening the door, even if just a crack, to someone who might bring back a semblance of the warmth that once filled these rooms. Late morning sunshine spilled through the mansion's tall windows as Howard stepped into the small sitting room he'd designated for Charlotte's sessions with Mrs. Delacroix. He paused, noticing how quiet the house felt despite Louisa's presence. A few muffled sounds drifted from the kitchen, utensils clinking, water running, but otherwise calm prevailed. For a moment, he wondered whether calm was truly beneficial for his daughter, or if it merely reflected the numbness they'd been living under since Caroline's death. Mrs. Delacroix, seated primly on an upholstered chair, smiled at Howard. Her salt and pepper hair was gathered in a low twist, and she exuded the same steady warmth he remembered from his wife's hospital days. Her role went beyond therapist. She was a friend to both Caroline and him, a gentle presence that had become invaluable. Next to her, Charlotte sat with her hands folded on her lap, eyes darting between her father and the older woman. "Howard," Mrs. Delacroix greeted softly. "We were just talking about things Charlotte might enjoy. She mentioned dancing. I understand you have someone new in the house with a background in ballet." Howard cleared his throat, wondering how much Charlotte had shared. "Yes, her name's Louisa Santos. I hired her recently for housekeeping and some childcare duties. She mentioned she used to dance professionally." Mrs. Delacroix nodded, then turned her gaze to Charlotte. "And you think you might like to learn a bit of ballet from her, dear?" Charlotte's cheeks tinged pink, and she shrugged, not offering a verbal response. Yet there was a small spark in her eyes that Howard recognized as interest. He felt an unfamiliar sense of hope bloom in his chest. After all this time, Charlotte seemed to show glimpses of life again. Mrs. Delacroix shifted her attention to Howard. This could be a positive avenue for Charlotte's emotional expression. Movement has a way of bypassing the barriers we create in our minds. Perhaps you could encourage Louisa to introduce a few simple steps. Howard glanced at his daughter, who looked both intrigued and nervous. Part of him wanted to keep the house still, as if motion or music might disturb Caroline's memory, but the other part, stirred by guilt, desperation and love, realized that doing nothing would keep Charlotte locked in sorrow. He inhaled quietly, then nodded. I can speak to Louisa about it. We'll see if Charlotte's comfortable." A soft knock interrupted them. Louisa appeared in the doorway, as if conjured by their conversation. She gave them all a polite smile, then looked at Charlotte. "I'm sorry to intrude. I was just checking if you needed anything, or if I could offer some snacks. There's fresh fruit in the kitchen." Charlotte peered at her father and then at Mrs. Delacroix, looking for some clue. The psychologist spoke gently. "Actually, Louisa, we were discussing the possibility of a little dance practice for Charlotte, something simple to help her feel more at ease. How do you feel about that?" Louisa's eyes brightened. "Oh, I'd be honored. Of course, if Charlotte wants to. Ballet was a big part of my life, and I still remember many foundational steps." Howard stood silent for a moment. He recalled the cautionary voice of his father-in-law, forever warning against unnecessary distractions. Yet seeing Charlotte's cautious nod was enough to dispel his reservations. "Then let's give it a try," he said, hearing the slight tremor of uncertainty in his own voice. Mrs. Delacroix gave him a nod of approval. She soon wrapped up the session, reminding Howard that the true strength in grief recovery often came from meaningful activities. "Be open," she advised him quietly as she gathered her notes, "even if it feels daunting. Sometimes, letting new life into your world is the bravest thing you can do." After she left, Howard hovered near the doorway, observing as Louisa spoke softly to Charlotte. He couldn't make out the entire conversation, but he caught a few words about classical music and a few gentle instructions. Charlotte listened intently, fiddling with her hands, as if unsure what to do with the sudden attention. Her eyes never left Louisa's face. A short while later, Howard retreated to his study. He tried to focus on a new property deal, but his mind kept drifting back to the subtle changes unfolding under his roof. Louisa's presence was beginning to melt the permafrost that had encased this house for years. Still, he felt a pang of fear. Would his father-in-law see this new development as a distraction or an unseemly attempt to replace Caroline? The older man's critical gaze loomed like a dark cloud on the horizon. Yet for the moment, a sense of cautious optimism prevailed. If Mrs. Delacroix could be considered the voice of wisdom, his mentor of sorts, then she was guiding him to trust in small steps, to allow the possibility that Charlotte could find healing through dance. Though he still wrestled with uncertainty, Howard realized that in taking this step, he was edging closer to a new stage in his life, one where the door to his heart, tightly sealed for so long, might begin to open just enough for hope to slip in. The following morning, Howard was startled awake by the sound of soft piano music resonating from somewhere downstairs. He rose, threw on a robe, and followed the gentle melody. It led him to the family lounge, a normally quiet space with a plush sofa and shelves of carefully curated art books. There, Louisa stood by a Bluetooth speaker, guiding Charlotte through a simple ballet exercise. The child's feet attempted a small plie, her posture tense yet earnest. The early sunlight spilled through sheer curtains, illuminating them in a soft glow. Howard paused at the threshold, uncertain whether he should interrupt. Instead, he watched. The music, a delicate waltz, enveloped the room in a sense of possibility. Louisa gently corrected Charlotte's stance, encouraging her to straighten her back. Charlotte glanced toward the doorway, spotted Howard, and almost lost her footing. Her face flushed, but she continued. When the song ended, Charlotte exhaled, and Louisa clapped quietly. "That was very good for a beginner," Louisa assured her. "You have a natural grace in your movements." A faint smile tugged at Charlotte's lips, something rare in recent years. Howard felt his chest tighten. The scene was so different from the stoic routine he'd grown used to. He cleared his throat to announce his presence. "I didn't mean to intrude. Morning." Louisa turned, offering him a welcoming nod. Good morning, Mr. Price. We were just trying a few warm-up exercises. Charlotte seemed interested. Howard noticed the way Charlotte blushed, averting her gaze. I'm glad, he said softly. Don't let me stop you. Before the next piece of music could start, Howard's cell phone vibrated in his robe pocket. Glancing at the screen, he recognized his father-in-law's name, Richard Lowry. Hesitation made him linger, but he eventually accepted the call. Hello, he said, stepping into the hallway. Lowry's voice crackled with its usual stern quality. Howard, I've been hearing rumors that you hired some new live-in help, someone young and foreign. Howard winced at his father-in-law's blunt tone. Yes, Louisa Santos. She's excellent with Charlotte, and that's all that matters. Came the disapproving reply. I hope you've vetted her thoroughly. Any scandal could reflect poorly on our family. You understand that I will always look out for Charlotte's best interests. The implied threat burned in Howard's ear. I'm sure, he answered curtly, but Charlotte's well-being is my top priority. I'll do whatever is best for her, with or without your approval. He ended the call, feeling a wave of anxiety settle in his stomach. Returning to the lounge, he forced a smile for Charlotte's sake. They had already resumed a new exercise, and Charlotte appeared to be following Louisa's guidance. The stiffness in her posture was slowly giving way to a softer fluidity. Once the short practice session concluded, Charlotte headed upstairs to dress for school, while Louisa started tidying up. Howard lingered, noticing the subtle change in the room's ambience. It felt lighter. You've made quite an impact on her, Howard said, keeping his tone even. I'm grateful, Louisa shrugged with a small smile. She's very receptive. I think she just needs someone to encourage her to express herself. Dance can be a language when words are too hard to find. He nodded, recalling the numerous times Charlotte had struggled to voice her feelings since Caroline passed. I'm trying to let go of my reservations, he admitted. It's not easy for me. Louisa studied him with kindness. I understand. Sometimes the hardest step is the first one outside your comfort zone. Her words struck a chord, echoing what Mrs. Delacroix had said in her own way. For so long, Howard had maintained a regimented life, convincing himself it was the best way to protect Charlotte and himself. Now a single morning dance routine threatened to unravel that carefully constructed solitude. Soon, Howard drove Charlotte to school, noticing on the way that she was unusually quiet. He wondered if she was already missing the sense of fun she'd experienced moments earlier. He wanted to ask, to reassure her that she could continue dancing, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he gave her a parting hug and a brief smile before she slipped through the school's large doors. Back at his office, he tried to lose himself in property negotiations and staff briefings. Yet images of Charlotte attempting ballet poses with Louisa's gentle instruction kept intruding. Even more pressing was the memory of his father-in-law's warning. He knew that any sign of impropriety or rumor could lead to legal threats over Charlotte's custody. Despite the worry, something in him felt lighter. His daughter had shown a flash of genuine interest, perhaps even happiness. That alone justified forging ahead, even if it meant stepping into unknown territory. The shift might be small, but it was enough to stir a mix of optimism and fear. Howard realized he was crossing a threshold, leaving behind the stagnation of the past 4 years and risking a path where he had no control over the outcome. That weekend, the sun cast a warm glow over the vast backyard of Howard's estate. The lawn stretched out behind the mansion, dotted with well-pruned rose bushes and ancient oak trees. Louisa and Charlotte had decided to take their ballet practice outdoors, and Howard watched from the patio, half hidden behind a tall potted fern. He'd told himself he was only there to keep an eye on things. But in truth, He was captivated by the sight of Charlotte stepping into the open air, arms raised in a hesitant first position. Louisa guided her through each motion, explaining the importance of balance and breath. The child's hair shone in the sunlight, and for once, her shoulders looked less burdened by sorrow. A gentle breeze fluttered the edges of Louisa's loose cardigan as she demonstrated a simple pirouette, her movements fluid and confident. Charlotte tried to imitate the spin, wobbling slightly before giggling in surprise. That sound, a genuine, airy giggle, resonated in Howard's heart like a forgotten melody. He glanced down at his phone, recalling that he had left a high-level real estate meeting earlier than usual. His business partner, Peter Hamilton, had taken over in his absence. Typically, Howard would never miss such a crucial discussion, but he couldn't shake the feeling that seeing Charlotte's progress was more important. Soon, Louisa switched off the small speaker she'd brought outside. "All right. I think that's enough for now," she said, catching her breath. Charlotte looked up at her eagerly, cheeks flushed with exertion. "Can we do more tomorrow?" Charlotte asked in a timid voice, glancing over at her father. At the sound of her speaking with such clarity, Howard nearly dropped his phone. She had spoken, an actual request, tinged with excitement. Louisa gave an encouraging nod. "Of course, if it's okay with your dad." Howard quickly stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Yes, that's fine," he managed, trying not to betray the surge of emotion he felt. "So long as it makes you happy, Charlotte." Charlotte's face lit with a shy smile. She grabbed her water bottle, then strolled back toward the house, leaving Louisa and Howard standing under the shade of an oak tree. The air felt delicate, the moment tinged with an almost vulnerable softness. "You left your meeting early, didn't you?" Louisa asked gently, noticing the dress shirt and loosened tie that suggested a rushed departure. Howard nodded. "Peter can handle it. This seemed more important." A hint of relief crossed her features. "I'm glad you feel that way. She really is a special girl, Mr. Price. I think she's been waiting for someone to show her it's okay to come out of her shell." Howard let out a slow breath. "I realize that now, but I'm not sure how to navigate it." He gazed off into the distance, where carefully manicured hedges lined the property. "So much of my life has revolved around protecting her, shielding her from the pain. Maybe I ended up isolating her more than helping." Louisa's voice was gentle. "Loss can do that to people, especially when you think you have to shoulder everything alone. Dance taught me that it's important to let others see your vulnerability. It's part of being human." He absorbed her words, feeling a pang of guilt for the times he'd rebuffed any attempt at connection. "I appreciate what you're doing for Charlotte," he said earnestly. "But you should know, my father-in-law, Richard Lowry, might not be pleased if he finds out. He's very protective of his granddaughter. He has influence." Louisa's expression grew solemn. "I understand, but I also believe in doing what's best for Charlotte. If she finds joy in dance, no one should take that from her." He nodded, uncertain how to respond. The mention of Lowry reminded him that gossip and scrutiny hovered like dark clouds over every decision he made. Yet for once, he didn't want to give in to fear. He watched as Charlotte disappeared into the house, her posture noticeably straighter. That afternoon, they returned to their daily routines. Howard answered business calls, Louisa prepared dinner, and Charlotte spent time reading. But an undercurrent of change flowed through the house. Instead of a gloomy hush, a quieter sense of anticipation filled each room. Even the staff who came by for specialized tasks, like the gardener or the occasional cook, remarked on how different the atmosphere felt. Before bed, Howard paused in the corridor outside Charlotte's room. He could hear her softly humming a song from earlier. The child who once regarded the world with distrust now hummed. her voice echoing the new rhythm that had entered their home. While Howard still worried about the ramifications, he couldn't deny that something wonderful was taking root. It was as though they had stepped into a new realm of possibilities, one where music, movement, and heartfelt connections replaced the silence that had long smothered them. Over the next few days, Howard grappled with the delicate balance between his corporate responsibilities and the evolving emotional landscape at home. He spent the mornings reviewing spreadsheets and finalizing acquisition proposals, then rushed back to the mansion in the late afternoon, drawn by the prospect of witnessing Charlotte's slow transformation through dance. Most of the time, he observed from a respectful distance as Louisa guided Charlotte through basic stretches and gentle routines. Sometimes he remained within earshot, sorting through business emails on his phone while classical music wove a gentle backdrop. Other times, he'd find an excuse to stand closer, maybe pretend to water a plant or adjust a piece of decor, just so he could hear the soft thud of Charlotte's steps on the hardwood floor. One evening, as the final notes of a piano piece faded, Louisa encouraged Charlotte to take a small bow. The child complied, blushing under Louisa's praise. That gesture of modest pride was so reminiscent of Caroline, who had always taught Charlotte to acknowledge her own achievements with grace. Howard felt a tug of memory, not entirely painful, but tinged with a certain sadness he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. Afterwards, Charlotte ran upstairs to finish her homework before bed. Howard lingered in the living room with Louisa. He noticed how she wore her curly hair tied back with a simple ribbon, and how her once nervous demeanor had given way to a measured confidence. She had adapted to his household routines almost seamlessly, preparing meals, managing the laundry, and still finding time to connect with Charlotte on a meaningful level. "Thank you," Howard said, his voice quieter than usual, "for everything you're doing. I realize you weren't hired to be a dance instructor, but your help has been invaluable." Louisa's face softened. "It's my pleasure. Charlotte reminds me of a cousin I helped raise back home in Rio, shy but full of potential. Sometimes a little encouragement goes a long way." He found himself curious about her past, about the life she'd led before coming to Los Angeles. Yet he hesitated, worried she might find the questions too personal. Perhaps sensing his interest, Louisa spoke softly. "I miss dancing, but it became impossible to pursue professionally. My mother fell ill, and I needed to earn money to support her treatments, so I moved here." Howard nodded, a surge of empathy washing over him. "I'm sorry," he offered. "It must have been difficult." Louisa shrugged, eyes downcast for a moment. "Life takes unexpected turns. My dream was to join a major ballet company, but I've realized there are other ways to find fulfillment. Teaching Charlotte has reminded me of that." Their conversation was cut short by a buzz from Howard's phone. The screen flashed with a text from his father-in-law, Richard Lowry. "We need to discuss Charlotte's living situation. Let's meet tomorrow." Howard's heart sank. The text was brief, but it carried a heavy undercurrent. He knew Lowry too well. This wouldn't be a casual discussion. He forced a tight smile at Louisa. "Excuse me," he murmured, stepping away to call Peter Hamilton. Peter answered on the second ring. "Howard, everything okay?" "Not exactly," Howard replied, voice strained. "Lowry wants to talk about Charlotte. I can't shake the feeling he's up to something. He's always worried about how I raise her, as if I'm not capable without Caroline." Peter sighed on the other end. "He's used to getting his way, especially with that social status of his. But you're Charlotte's father. You've done nothing wrong. Keep records of everything, her schooling, her well-being, so if he tries legal action, you can show a stable environment." Howard's gaze drifted to the living room, where the faint echo of music still lingered. "Yes, I suppose you're right. I just wish I could focus on Charlotte without this constant threat hanging over me. Well, you know I'm here if you need help, Peter offered. We can loop in the attorneys if necessary. They hung up, and Howard squared his shoulders as though bracing for a storm. The next day's meeting with Lowry loomed in his mind, overshadowing the gentle warmth he'd been experiencing at home. After tidying up a few last tasks, he climbed the stairs and checked on Charlotte. She was sleeping peacefully, her small frame curled under soft blankets. For once, her face seemed free of anxiety. As Howard quietly shut her door, he acknowledged a conflict brewing inside him. On one hand, he wanted to shield Charlotte from any more loss or upheaval. On the other, he felt more certain each day that opening their life to Louisa's kindness was exactly what Charlotte needed. The challenge was figuring out how to hold on to this fragile progress when the world and Richard Lowry might be intent on knocking it down. Before retreating to his own bedroom, Howard paused in the hallway, listening to the hush of the house. He found a certain comfort in the fact that silence was no longer oppressive. It was simply a moment of rest before another day began. It felt like a new balance, an uneasy one, perhaps, but a step closer to something whole and hopeful. True to his word, Richard Lowry arrived at Howard's office the following afternoon. From the moment he stepped through the glass doors, tension rippled through the air. Lowry wore a tailored suit and an expression of barely concealed disapproval. He wasted no time with pleasantries. "I hear Charlotte's got a new caretaker," he said, striding into Howard's private conference room. "Some Brazilian woman? What's her name? Louisa something." Howard resisted the urge to bristle. "Louisa Santos. She's capable, caring, and Charlotte is responding well to her." Lowry's lip curled. "Are you certain? I'm concerned about the example she might set, given her background. You've only been widowed a few years. People will talk if they see you." Howard's nostrils flared. "This isn't about people talking. This is about Charlotte's happiness, and Caroline wouldn't want her daughter to be miserable." Lowry's jaw tightened. "I'm aware of what my daughter would want, Howard. I'm simply reminding you to maintain a dignified environment. You must remember, I have the means to challenge custody if I believe you're not acting in Charlotte's best interest." Howard's heart pounded. He knew Lowry's threats weren't idle. Still, an unexpected surge of resolve stiffened his spine. "Louisa is part of the household for Charlotte's sake," he said, keeping his voice steady. "Unless you have evidence that she's harmful, I'd appreciate you respecting that decision." Silence settled between them, thick and charged. Finally, Lowry stepped back, adjusting his tie. "We'll see. Don't forget, I'm watching." He left without so much as a goodbye, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Howard exhaled shakily, feeling the weight of the confrontation. He'd stood up to Lowry before, but never with such open defiance. After a moment, he returned to his office, where Peter Hamilton waited, a concerned look on his face. "You all right?" Peter asked gently. Howard shook his head. "Not exactly, but I made it clear I won't be intimidated." He sank into his chair, running a hand through his hair. "I hate living under his scrutiny, but for Charlotte's sake, I can't let him scare me." Peter took a seat across from him. "That's the right attitude. The more comfortable Charlotte is, the less ground Lowry has to stand on. Maybe we can gather testimonials, her teachers, Mrs. Delacroix, people who can attest to her improved well-being." Howard nodded slowly, feeling a flicker of relief at the idea of allies. "Yes, that might help. I'll reach out to Mrs. Delacroix and see if she's willing to provide some kind of professional statement about Charlotte's progress." Later that day, Howard visited the school principal to discuss Charlotte's situation. He explained that she'd been dancing at home with Louisa and seemed less withdrawn, The principal, a soft-spoken woman named Ms. Channing, smiled brightly at the news. "I've noticed Charlotte participating a bit more in group work," Ms. Channing said. "It's subtle, but she's making eye contact and offering a word here or there. She's even shown interest in the school's mini-performance next month. Nothing major, just a small song and dance routine, but still, that's progress." Howard felt a warmth spread through his chest. "That's wonderful. Do you think it would help if I encouraged her to join?" Mrs. Channing's eyes sparkled. "Absolutely. It's very low pressure, just a brief show for parents. It might boost her confidence." Buoyed by the principal's support, Howard left feeling more optimistic. On the ride home, he called Mrs. Delacroix, who confirmed she'd be happy to speak on Charlotte's behalf if needed. He was forming a network of allies, people who saw Charlotte's improvement and believed in the changes taking root. When he arrived at the mansion, he found Louisa in the entry hall, balancing a basket of laundry. She paused when she saw him, noticing the relief in his eyes. "Long day?" she asked with a sympathetic tilt of her head. "You could say that," he replied. He glanced upstairs, hearing muted music from Charlotte's room. "I spoke to the principal. She says Charlotte's doing better at school and might even join a small performance." Louisa's face lit up. "Really? That's wonderful news. I hope it gives her more confidence." Howard hesitated, then softly added, "Thank you. You've played a big part in that." Louisa set the laundry basket down. "She's the one doing the work, finding her voice. I'm just here to guide her." A sudden wave of gratitude swept over him. For a moment, they simply looked at one another, a quiet understanding passing between them. This was no longer just an employer-employee relationship. It felt like a shared mission to help a child heal. That night, as he reviewed real estate documents, Howard felt an unexpected sense of hope. Yes, Lowry would continue to cast a shadow, and yes, the risk of scandal or legal fights loomed, but he wasn't alone in wanting what was best for Charlotte. With support from Peter, Ms. Channing, Mrs. Delacroix, and even Louisa, he might finally be able to stand firm against the pressures that had haunted him since Caroline's death. Early the next morning, Howard awakened to a peculiar hush that blanketed the house. He descended the staircase, half expecting to hear soft music or footsteps indicating another impromptu dance session. Instead, he was greeted by tense silence. In the kitchen, Louisa stood by the sink, phone in hand, her knuckles white against the countertop. "Louisa," he asked, stepping closer, "is something wrong?" She turned, eyes brimming with worry. "I just received a call from one of my cousins in Brazil. My mother's condition has worsened." Her voice quivered. "I'm not sure what I should do. If she needs surgery or something serious, I might have to go back." Howard's chest tightened. He reached out to lightly touch her arm. "I'm sorry to hear that. Let me know if there's anything I can do. Financial support, travel arrangements, anything." Louisa gave him a grateful nod, but anguish etched her features. "Thank you. I don't want to leave Charlotte, not when she's making progress. But my mother is, well, she's all I have back home." Before Howard could respond, Charlotte appeared in the doorway, looking concerned. "Are you okay, Louisa?" she asked in a timid voice. It was unusual for her to initiate conversation, which underscored her genuine worry. Louisa forced a small smile. "I'm fine, sweetie. Just some family stuff." Charlotte's brows furrowed, but she nodded. "If you have to leave, can you come back?" Her eyes flicked between Louisa and her father. The vulnerability in her question tore at Howard's heart. Louisa set the phone aside. "Of course, Charlotte," she said, though her voice held uncertainty. "I'll figure it out." That day, the air felt charged with worry, each moment tinged by the possibility that Louisa might have to leave on short notice. Howard tried to focus on his work, but his mind spun with scenarios. How Charlotte would handle losing another person she cared about, how it might unravel her progress. He also fretted about the cold disapproval that would surely emanate from Lowry if this situation became public. Around lunchtime, Peter Hamilton called with a serious tone. "I need you to check out some online gossip columns, Howard. It looks like someone leaked a story about your new live-in housekeeper and her relationship to you and Charlotte." Howard's stomach sank. "What do you mean, leaked a story? There are photos of Louisa and Charlotte practicing dance in the backyard. The headlines suggest a budding romance between you and her. They're spinning it as scandalous. Millionaire employer falls for young caretaker. It's sensationalism, but it's out there." Howard closed his eyes, anger and dread mingling in his gut. "I need to handle this before Lowry sees it. He'll use it as ammunition." Peter sighed. "I'm sure he will. My advice is to get ahead of the narrative. Make a statement about your family's well-being. Emphasize that Louisa's role is strictly professional, that she's helping Charlotte cope." After hanging up, Howard found Louisa in the garden, where she was attempting to distract herself by trimming roses. As he approached, he couldn't help but notice how her hands trembled slightly around the clippers. "Louisa," he began gently, "we have another issue. Someone took photos of you and Charlotte dancing. Now a gossip site is implying that you and I—" He trailed off, the words lodging in his throat. Her eyes widened, confusion mingling with hurt. "But that's ridiculous. We haven't— there's nothing to imply a romance." Howard pressed his lips together. "I know, but the media loves a scandal. And my father-in-law, he'll seize on this to paint me as an unfit parent. He's been threatening custody battles since Caroline died." A cloud of realization passed over Louisa's features. "I see. Well, if you'd like me to leave, to avoid fueling rumors, He shook his head firmly, surprising himself with the vehemence of his response. "No, you're helping Charlotte. You've done nothing wrong." Looking away, he added softly, "I don't want you to go." They stood in tense silence, the air thick with unspoken fears. In that moment, Charlotte peered from the sliding glass door, sensing something amiss. She opened it a crack. "Daddy? Louisa?" Howard forced a reassuring smile. "It's okay, honey. Just some grown-up issues." Charlotte stepped onto the patio, hugging herself. Is someone leaving again?" Howard's heart clenched. He remembered all the times housekeepers had quit, leaving Charlotte feeling abandoned all over again. "We're trying to figure it out," he said gently. "There's a problem, but we'll deal with it." Louisa knelt down beside Charlotte, a fierce determination in her eyes that mirrored the protective instinct Howard felt. "No matter what happens," she said, "you've done so well with your dancing. Keep that in your heart, okay?" Charlotte nodded, her gaze flicking uncertainly from Louisa to her father. A chill breeze swept through the garden, ruffling the rose bushes. It felt as though a storm was gathering, threatening to shatter the fragile sense of hope they had nurtured. And yet, in that tremulous moment, Howard realized they were not the same isolated souls they had been before. They had each other, and if they stood united, perhaps they could weather whatever came next. Howard felt a leaden heaviness pressing against his chest as he stood by the bay window in his living room, staring at the garden. The memory of that gossip column, complete with blurry snapshots of Louisa dancing with Charlotte, gnawed at his peace of mind. Richard Lowry's veiled threats lingered in his thoughts, stirring dread that all his progress with Charlotte could be ripped away in a flurry of legal documents. But more immediate worries surfaced that morning. After her cousin's call, Louisa had spent hours trying to contact Brazil for clearer information about her mother's failing health. only to receive spotty updates that left her anxious and distracted. The once calm routine of the household was now marred by apprehension. Around mid-afternoon, Charlotte appeared by the window, glancing up at her father's drawn face. "Are we in trouble?" she asked in a hushed voice. Howard turned to her, heart twisting at her fearful tone. "No, sweetheart," he murmured, crouching to meet her eye level. "Some people are just saying silly things about us, but we're going to be fine." Charlotte shifted from foot to foot, then whispered, "Is Louisa leaving?" He wished he could offer a confident no, but the uncertainty of Louisa's mother's condition weighed on them. "I don't know yet," he admitted gently. "She might need to visit Brazil if her mom is really sick." "But we'll figure it out together," Charlotte nodded, eyes brimming with concern. Howard offered a small, reassuring smile and stroked her hair. She lingered for a moment, then went upstairs to her bedroom, shoulders slumped in a way that broke his heart. A few minutes later, Louisa appeared in the hallway, phone in hand. The strain in her expression was unmistakable. "My cousin managed to speak with one of the doctors," she said, voice trembling. "They're trying new treatments. It's serious, but they believe my mother might stabilize if these medications work." Howard exhaled, relieved there was at least a ray of hope. "That's something. If you need time off." She waved a hand, cutting him off. "I'd like to see how she responds to the treatment first. If she doesn't improve, I'll go back immediately." A breath caught in Howard's throat. Part of him wished he could offer a simple solution, pay for a better hospital or fly out with her, but everything felt tangled by the ongoing drama at home. He offered a tentative nod. "I understand." Over the next few days, life in the mansion took on an uneasy rhythm. Charlotte still practiced her steps, though her joy was tinted with worry. Louisa carried her phone everywhere, awaiting updates from Brazil. Howard moved between business meetings and frantic calls to Peter Hamilton about damage control in the media. The story hadn't blown up into a national scandal, but on certain gossip blogs, it simmered, fueling salacious speculation about the wealthy widower and his live-in caretaker. All this tension made for restless nights. One evening, close to midnight, Howard found himself in the quiet kitchen, rummaging for chamomile tea in hopes of calming his nerves. He was surprised to see Charlotte huddled at the table, too awake for such a late hour. "You okay?" he asked gently, flicking on a dim overhead light. Charlotte shrugged. "Couldn't sleep." She fiddled with a small notebook, which he recognized as something Mrs. Delacroix had once given her, encouraging her to jot down her feelings in drawings or short sentences. Howard poured hot water into 2 mugs, his voice hushed. "You know," he said, "if you want to talk about anything, I'm here." She hesitated, then flipped open the notebook, revealing a stick-figure sketch of herself, arms stretched as if dancing. Next to her was a taller figure, Louisa, presumably, and hovering behind them, a third figure with no discernible face, just a scribbled shape. He felt a pang, wondering if that faceless person represented him, or perhaps Caroline's memory. "I'm worried she'll leave," Charlotte said, pointing to Louisa's figure. "I like dancing. I don't want it to stop." Howard fought the urge to promise it wouldn't, aware that circumstances were beyond his full control. "Even if Louisa has to take a trip, that doesn't mean the dancing stops. You've learned a lot already, and I'm sure she'd come back as soon as she could." Charlotte nodded, her eyes downcast. "It's just everyone always goes away." Her voice cracked, and Howard's heart wrenched. He moved closer, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "I'm trying to make sure that doesn't happen again." He swallowed the knot in his throat, adding quietly, "And I don't want to go anywhere either. I promise you that." Eventually, he guided her back to her room, tucking her in and humming a tune Caroline once loved. Though he hadn't done that in years, the melody sprang to mind, merging memory with the present in a poignant moment he struggled to articulate. Charlotte's eyelids grew heavy, and she drifted into an uneasy sleep. Standing by her bedside, Howard found himself fighting tears. So much hung in the balance: Louisa's personal crisis, the threat of scandal, Richard Lowry's watchful glare. Yet in that moment, all that mattered was the gentle rise and fall of Charlotte's breath. He resolved, more fiercely than ever, to protect her newfound spark of life, no matter what storms might gather on the horizon. The next morning, Howard arrived at his office earlier than usual, determined to confront the rumor mill head-on. He'd spent part of the night drafting a statement clarifying that Louisa was an employee assisting with his daughter's emotional well-being, and that any insinuation of a romance was baseless. Peter Hamilton was waiting in the lobby, sipping a coffee and skimming through the latest headlines on his tablet. "Any new developments?" Howard asked, his tone brisk. Peter gave a weary shrug. "The original gossip piece hasn't escalated much, but your father-in-law is likely aware by now. I wouldn't put it past him to push the narrative if he thinks it'll help a custody battle." Howard led Peter into his private office and locked the door behind them. He handed over the typed statement. "Give this to our PR consultant," he said. "I want them to release it on our company's official channel. That might help set the record straight, or at least show we have nothing to hide." Peter read it silently, then nodded. "It's clear and calm, good approach. Should I run it by the legal team first?" "Yes, but I don't want it watered down into jargon. People need to see we're just a family trying to heal." After a brief strategy discussion, Peter headed out, leaving Howard alone with a fresh round of real estate documents stacked on his desk. Though business rarely took a back seat, he found his mind wandering to Charlotte's progress and Louisa's uncertain future. Every so often, the phone rang with updates, Francis passing along messages, Peter calling back with small PR tweaks. By noon, Howard felt mentally drained. Yet a glimmer of relief came in the form of a call from Louisa, who had just received another update from Brazil. "My mother's condition hasn't deteriorated further," she said, sounding exhausted yet grateful. "The new medications might be helping. I'm still worried, but for now, I think I can stay here a bit longer." Howard exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "I'm glad, truly, Charlotte will be relieved." A pause lingered on the line. "Finally," Louisa said, "thank you for offering help too. I'm not used to relying on others." He softened. "We rely on you for so much, so please let us support you when we can." That evening at home, Charlotte bounded into the foyer when Howard and Louisa informed her that Louisa wouldn't be leaving immediately. The child's shoulders visibly unburdened, and a soft glow returned to her eyes. Even so, the tension from the gossip column and Lowry's looming presence cast a subtle chill over the household. In a bid to lighten the atmosphere, Louisa suggested they expand the dance routine into a mini-performance just for the three of them. Charlotte's eyes lit up at the idea, and Howard, while initially apprehensive, realized it could be a welcome distraction. They cleared a small space in the living room, pushing aside an armchair and a coffee table. After dinner, Louisa selected a gentle waltz from her phone's playlist. Charlotte positioned herself in the center, glancing shyly at her father. Her tiny ballet slippers, a recent purchase, looked charming against the hardwood floor. As the music began, Louisa guided Charlotte in graceful steps. The girl's arms rose and fell in halting motions that gradually smoothed as she found her rhythm. Despite her nerves, she flowed through basic positions with surprising poise. Howard observed from the sofa, transfixed. This was the same child who used to cling to his leg in public, too shy to speak, who had once refused to leave her room for days. Now she swayed to the music, her expression a delicate mixture of concentration and joy. The hush of the room made each note resonate as though they inhabited a private world where negativity held no power. When the final note faded, Charlotte completed a hesitant curtsy. Louisa clapped with genuine enthusiasm, and Howard found himself applauding, softly at first, then more fully, feeling pride swell in his chest. "Bravo!" he said, meeting Charlotte's eyes. "That was beautiful." Charlotte blushed, a grin tugging at her lips. In that moment, a fleeting but profound sense of peace touched all three of them, as though the outside turmoil momentarily vanished. Howard realized that these were the moments worth fighting for, moments when Charlotte looked genuinely happy, when her spirit shone without the weight of grief or external threats. Yet even as he cherished the scene, reality lurked in the back of his mind. He recalled the paparazzi photos, the blog gossip, and Lowry's never-ending disapproval. If any of them could witness this intimate dance, would they twist it into more fodder for rumors? Would they claim Louisa was overstepping her role? Howard fought back the creeping dread. He wouldn't allow it to taint Charlotte's blossoming courage. He stood from the sofa and crossed the room, offering Charlotte a reassuring smile. "You know," he said gently, "I think you should show Ms. Channing at school how far you've come. She might have ideas for that mini-performance next month." Charlotte's eyes went wide. "Really? You want me to dance at school?" "If you want to," he clarified, kneeling beside her. "No pressure, but I think you're ready." Louisa beamed with quiet pride. Watching them, Howard sensed a new resolve taking shape. He had drawn a line in the sand. No matter the rumors, no matter Lowry's opinions, he would nurture this spark in Charlotte. Because in that spark, he saw the future, a future where pain and regret didn't define their lives, but rather where hope lit the path forward. Howard's determination was soon tested when, only a few days later, he received a terse phone call from Richard Lowry. The older man's voice thundered through the speaker. "Howard, we need to talk. I'm coming by the mansion tomorrow morning." "There've been more whispers. Some of my acquaintances have asked me directly if you've become romantically entangled with your employee. This is becoming an embarrassment." Howard's stomach churned, though he steadied his voice. "It's gossip, nothing more. Louisa is here to help Charlotte, and she's done wonders for her." Lowry fired back. "You realize that if this continues, I'll have no choice but to seek counsel on Charlotte's custody arrangement. I refuse to let you drag my granddaughter's reputation through the mud." Disbelief flared in Howard's chest. "Her reputation? She's 8 years old. She's not a socialite in your country club circuit. She's a grieving child who's finally showing signs of life again." The line went quiet for a moment. Then Lowry repeated, "Tomorrow morning," and hung up without waiting for a reply. A sense of dread settled over Howard. He thought about sending Charlotte to a friend's house or cancelling the meeting, but that would only bolster Lowry's narrative. Instead, he called Peter Hamilton and explained the situation. Peter offered to come by as a neutral party, but Howard declined, feeling this was a personal matter he needed to handle on his own. Next, he informed Louisa about the impending confrontation, not wanting her to be caught off guard. "I'll do my best to stay out of sight," she suggested quietly. "I don't want to make things worse." Howard nodded, though the idea of her retreating so Lowry wouldn't twist the situation made his blood boil. Nevertheless, he respected her caution. He spent the rest of the day in a constant state of tension, pacing the house, checking on Charlotte, and rereading potential legal steps he might need to take if Lowry escalated. Sleep came in fitful bursts that night, shadows of past regrets trailing through his dreams. Morning arrived with a grim hush. Howard seated himself in the living room, mentally rehearsing what he would say. Promptly at 10, the doorbell rang. Lowry stepped inside, followed by his lawyer, a sharp-eyed man with a leather briefcase in hand. They moved to the living room, ignoring Howard's polite offer of coffee. Lowry's lawyer opened the briefcase and retrieved some papers, laying them on the coffee table. "Mr. Lowry has concerns about the stability of Charlotte's home environment," he said. "We have documentation of recent media reports suggesting an inappropriate relationship. We'd like an explanation." Howard felt a spike of anger at the term inappropriate. He forced himself to speak calmly. "The media has spun a story out of nothing. I've issued a statement clarifying that Louisa is an employee, caring for Charlotte. You're welcome to see the improvements in Charlotte's emotional health for yourself if you bother to look." Lowry's mouth twisted. "As her grandfather, I'm not comfortable with a live-in housekeeper who has such close physical interaction with my granddaughter, especially if there's any romantic entanglement with you. It's unseemly." Howard bristled. "You should worry less about appearances and more about how Charlotte is actually doing. She's happier than she's been in years. She's dancing, for God's sake. She's speaking more. The truth is, you can't stand that I'm moving on from the grief in a way that doesn't fit your narrow expectations." His words hung in the air. Even the lawyer seemed taken aback by Howard's directness. Lowry's gaze hardened. "My daughter's memory deserves respect. I won't let you tarnish it with a scandal." Howard leaned forward, voice trembling with controlled fury. "Caroline wouldn't want Charlotte locked in sadness. She'd want her to live, to grow. Ask anyone who knew her. She spoke often about me finding happiness again if something happened to her." Lowry's face flickered with a mix of anger and denial. The lawyer cleared his throat, sliding one of the papers across the table. "We're considering filing a motion for temporary custody. If these allegations persist, Mr. Lowry wants an assurance that this arrangement with the housekeeper is purely professional and not affecting Charlotte's moral upbringing." Howard snatched up the paper, scanning the formal language that threatened to upend his life. "This is absurd," he muttered. "I've already explained. There's no affair. There's no jeopardy to Charlotte." Lowry stood, adjusting his coat. "Then prove it. Dismiss the girl. Find a respectable nanny, not some dancer from overseas. Show me you're still a responsible father, or I'll take this to court." Howard felt the walls closing in. He forced himself to remain calm, even though a storm raged inside him. "I won't dismiss Louisa," he said firmly. "Charlotte needs her, and she's part of our home now." Lowry's lawyer packed up the papers with a crisp efficiency. The older man turned away, ignoring Howard's outstretched hand. "You'll be hearing from me," he said coldly, already stepping toward the door. The two men left, the echo of the closing door reverberating through the mansion. For several minutes, Howard stood rooted in the living room, fists clenched, breath shallow. His father-in-law's final words hung in the air like a guillotine ready to drop. The possibility of losing Charlotte gnawed at him, a new depth of fear taking hold. He had no intention of giving in, yet he couldn't ignore the weight of a legal battle. The question loomed: how far was Lowry willing to go, and how could Howard protect the fragile peace he'd fought so hard to cultivate? By late afternoon, the house felt tense and subdued. After Lowry's departure, Howard had locked himself away in his study, unable to focus on business or anything else. He typed out a brief email to his attorney, outlining the morning's confrontation and attaching a scanned copy of the paperwork Lowry's lawyer had shown him. A swirl of dread gnawed at him, but he forced himself to remain methodical. Outside the study, Charlotte tiptoed past the closed door, sensing her father's turmoil. She found Louisa in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with mechanical precision. The hush between them bristled with concern. Finally, Charlotte mustered the courage to ask, "Is Grandpa going to take me away?" Louisa's hand faltered on the cutting board. She set the knife down, then turned to face Charlotte. I don't know exactly what he's planning, she admitted gently. But your dad will fight for you. Don't be scared. Charlotte's eyes shimmered with tears. He's so mad. He keeps saying I'm not safe. But I'm fine. This house is better now. Louisa leaned down, resting a comforting hand on Charlotte's shoulder. Your grandfather is worried in his own way. Sometimes people let that worry turn into anger. They lingered in silent communion until Howard finally emerged, looking drained. He caught sight of Charlotte's anxious expression and mustered a reassuring smile. No one is taking you anywhere, he said, his voice calm but strained. I promise. As evening approached, Howard decided to break the oppressive mood by encouraging Charlotte to practice a new dance sequence she'd been learning. Though overshadowed by anxiety, he believed that continuing their small routines might provide some sense of normalcy. Louisa set up the Bluetooth speaker in the living room, and Charlotte stretched her limbs, trying to focus on the music. Midway through the practice, however, Charlotte's steps faltered. She paused, tears edging her eyes. I can't concentrate, she whispered. I keep thinking about what Grandpa said. Howard's heart twisted. He moved closer, bending down so he was at her eye level. I'm sorry, he murmured. Maybe we should take a break. Louisa spoke softly from behind them. Remember that dance can help you let out your worries. Sometimes it's about releasing what's inside. Charlotte glanced at her, uncertain. But after a moment, she inhaled deeply, and the music resumed. Her next movements were shaky at first, then steadied as she lost herself in the rhythm. Howard watched, struck by how each step held a fragile determination. He realized Charlotte was doing exactly what Louisa suggested, channeling her fear into motion. When the track ended, Charlotte stood in the center of the room, chest rising and falling with each breath. A hint of perspiration dotted her brow. Howard applauded quietly, tears threatening to surface. That was brave, he said. Charlotte managed a weak smile. Her gaze flickered to the window, as though expecting her grandfather to appear at any moment. Howard understood that no matter how many times he reassured her, the threat remained. Yet he took solace in this small victory. She hadn't let fear paralyze her entirely. After Charlotte went upstairs to shower, Louisa began tidying the living room. Howard lingered, hands shoved into his pockets. I've emailed my attorney, he said. We'll prepare for the worst-case scenario, but I'm hoping we can settle this without a court battle. Louisa nodded, her expression weary. I'm sorry. I feel like this is my fault. Howard's brow furrowed. You didn't cause any of this. Lowry is grasping at anything to control the situation. He's never really approved of how I handled Caroline's passing. Still, Louisa whispered, if I wasn't here, he might not have a reason to push so hard. A surge of protectiveness flooded Howard. He stepped closer, voice quiet yet firm. Charlotte needs you. And so do I. In a way. Not because of rumors or obligations, but because you've brought something good back into this house. Don't blame yourself for my father-in-law's anger. Their eyes met, a moment of unspoken understanding passing between them. Then a tremor of a smile appeared on Louisa's face as she turned away, focusing on gathering stray dance ribbons and picking up the phone charger off the floor. Howard remained still, absorbing the significance of the words he had just spoken. Upstairs, he checked on Charlotte, who was already in bed, reading a children's book about dancers. She peered at him over the pages, still wary, but no longer overwhelmed. Howard kissed her forehead gently and whispered goodnight, thinking about how close they'd come to losing the progress they'd achieved. For now, at least, they had won a minor reprieve, but the deeper conflict still loomed, unresolved, making each day a precarious balance between hope and fear. The following week, Howard found himself juggling the complexities of potential legal action and the emotional needs of his household. Phone calls between attorneys became part of his daily routine. Peter Hamilton tried to maintain optimism, frequently reminding Howard that Lowry would have to prove actual harm to Charlotte, something that simply didn't exist. But fear lingered. Howard carried it like a weight in his chest, worried that even if Lowry's claims lacked evidence, the emotional toll on Charlotte could be devastating. At the same time, Louisa was still receiving updates from Brazil about her mother. The new treatments showed promise, yet the situation remained precarious. A single crisis could pull Louisa away at any time. On a Wednesday afternoon, Howard decided to have a direct conversation with Charlotte's school principal, Ms. Channing, not just about her performance in classes, but also about the possibility of the school supporting them if Lowry's threats escalated. After scheduling an appointment, he arrived at the school, standing in the same hallway where he'd once felt so helpless when Charlotte would barely speak. Ms. Channing received him in her small, book-lined office. "I'm glad you came," she said, folding her hands on the desk. "Charlotte's been doing quite well, especially in group activities. She still struggles with openness, but she's come so far." Howard managed a small smile. "Yes, she's been dancing at home. It helps." Miss Channing nodded, then eyed him curiously. "Is everything all right? You seem concerned," he sighed, hesitating a moment before laying out the basics. "My father-in-law is threatening legal steps regarding Charlotte's custody. He believes our new housekeeper has caused a scandal. None of that is true, but he's determined. I'm worried about how it might affect Charlotte, both emotionally and at school." Sympathy crossed Miss Channing's face. "We have student welfare counselors. If there's anything we can do, write a letter, provide insights into her progress, please let us know. We've seen a definite improvement in Charlotte's social engagement. That's a direct reflection of her home environment becoming more supportive." Her words offered a measure of hope. Howard thanked her and left the school with renewed determination. He planned to gather every testimony he could, Mrs. Delacroix, Ms. Channing, any staff from the household who had observed Charlotte's positive changes. It was a plan that gave him direction, albeit one laced with anxiety. Back at the mansion, he found Louisa in the foyer, her phone pressed to her ear. She whispered into the receiver, then ended the call with a trembling sigh. "My mother's stable," she relayed. "But the doctors say the next few weeks are crucial. If she relapses, I'll need to leave at once." Howard swallowed, feeling selfish for how relieved he was that she didn't have to go immediately. "I'm sorry. If that happens—" "I know," Louisa interrupted gently. "You've offered to help however you can. I'm grateful." He nodded, sensing how her worry for her mother mingled with the tension in the house. Even as they faced external pressures, a quieter fear simmered. What if life forced them apart at a moment when Charlotte's emotional health depended on their unity? That evening, Charlotte's teacher emailed a short video of her practicing for the school's mini-performance. Just a small routine with a group of classmates. It was an informal rehearsal, but the child's posture and hesitant smile filled Howard with pride. As he showed the video to Louisa, he noticed the warmth in her eyes. Even amid her own stresses, she took genuine joy in Charlotte's achievements. However, the bubble of momentary happiness burst when Howard's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID, bracing himself. It was Lowry's attorney again. Stepping into the study, he closed the door behind him. "Yes," he said, forcing steadiness into his tone. The lawyer's voice was clipped. "We've arranged a mediation session for next Tuesday. It'll be an opportunity to avoid a formal lawsuit. But Mr. Lowry insists you take immediate steps to remove Miss Santos from the household if you wish to settle peacefully." Howard nearly snarled at the ultimatum. "That's not an option. She's critical to Charlotte's well-being." A long pause crackled over the line. Then we may be heading toward a formal custody battle." Howard's pulse pounded. "So be it," he managed, though his stomach twisted. He hung up, leaning against the desk to steady himself. The very idea of a custody fight felt like stepping onto a battlefield with Charlotte caught in the crossfire. He emerged into the living room, forcing a neutral expression. Louisa studied his face, clearly sensing the tension. Charlotte, across the room, fiddled with a small music box that played a soft lullaby. The delicate notes drifted through the air, contrasting sharply with Howard's pounding heartbeat. For a moment, he couldn't find words. He simply stood there, realizing the stakes had never been higher. Looking at Charlotte's slight figure, her eyes scanning the spinning ballerina inside the music box, he felt a surge of fierce resolve. They had come too far. She'd found her voice, her courage. He wouldn't let Lowry or any gossip column extinguish that. Even if tensions were rising, if the path ahead was filled with uncertainty, he clung to one certainty. Charlotte deserved the chance to keep dancing, keep smiling, keep healing, and he would do whatever it took to preserve that fragile hope. Howard sat at the polished conference table, tapping his pen against a stack of documents. Despite the modern decor of the law office, glass walls, sleek chairs, fluorescent lights, he felt like he was in a medieval hall, waiting for a duel to begin. On the other side of the table sat Richard Lowry, arms crossed, a slight sneer on his lips. His attorney sat next to him, briefcase neatly latched, face unreadable. Howard's own lawyer, Patricia Young, quietly organized her files, offering him a reassuring nod. They had come for a mediation session to address Lowry's custody concerns. The room's tension crackled like static before a storm. Howard glanced at the clock on the wall, noticing that it was precisely 9 a.m., the agreed start time. No one had spoken more than 2 words since arriving. "Shall we begin?" the mediator, a calm-faced woman named Denise Monroe, said gently. She wore a neutral navy suit, and her demeanor radiated experience in handling high-conflict family cases. Lowry shifted in his seat. "Yes," he said, leaning forward. "I want clarity on the environment my granddaughter is living in. I'm here because I'm deeply concerned about Charlotte's well-being." Howard's grip on the pen tightened. He resisted the urge to fire back an immediate retort, instead letting Patricia guide the conversation. Patricia cleared her throat, keeping her voice level. "Mr. Price is prepared to provide documentation of Charlotte's recent improvements, letters from her school principal, her psychologist, and household staff who can attest to her thriving under the current arrangement." Lowry's attorney raised a brow. "We've seen mention of these so-called improvements, but what about the media rumors of a romantic relationship with the live-in caretaker, Ms. Santos? Surely that environment is questionable for a child still grieving her mother." Howard's anger flared, but he inhaled deeply. "Those rumors are baseless. Louisa Santos is Charlotte's caretaker, not my romantic partner. She's been teaching Charlotte to dance, which has helped my daughter express her emotions." Lowry's sneer hardened. "Yet the tabloids paint a different picture. And even if there is no affair, I have grave misgivings about a housekeeper from overseas becoming so involved. It's unorthodox." Patricia spoke up, handing Denise Monroe a neatly typed folder. "Here are affidavits from Charlotte's school principal, Ms. Channing, and her psychologist, Mrs. Delacroix. Both testify that Charlotte's emotional health has markedly improved since Ms. Santos's arrival." Denise flipped through the pages, nodding with mild interest. "Mr. Lowry, have you had a chance to see Charlotte lately? Perhaps observing her current state might address your concerns." Lowry glanced away. "I tried visiting, but it's clear I'm not welcome when Ms. Santos is around. And let's not forget we're discussing a father who, in my view, is too wrapped up in a new project to remember my daughter's legacy." Howard bit the inside of his cheek, forcing himself to remain calm. Caroline's memory is always with us. But Charlotte can't stay frozen in time. She needs support, love, and yes, dance, if that's what opens her up. A tense silence descended. Denise set aside the folder. It seems we have two main questions. First, is Charlotte's environment unsafe or detrimental? Second, is there an inappropriate relationship that might harm Charlotte's emotional well-being? Lowry's attorney nodded curtly. Exactly. My client's position is that the caretaker's role should be strictly professional, preferably someone older, or at least someone not teaching intimate physical activities like dance. Patricia rolled her eyes but kept her response measured. Dancing with a child is hardly scandalous. Mr. Price can present photographs or videos showing the wholesome nature of these sessions. Howard cleared his throat. I also have Charlotte's own words. She told her school counselor she's happier at home than she's been in years. Lowry looked unconvinced. Words coached by the caretaker, no doubt. Denise, sensing tempers rising, tapped the table. Let's not devolve into baseless accusations. Mr. Lowry, if you have any evidence that Ms. Santos is unfit, now is the time to present it. For a moment, Lowry's eyes flickered with uncertainty. He exchanged a look with his attorney, who offered no new documents. Clearing his throat, Lowry spoke, I simply believe the arrangement invites moral and social complications. Howard leaned forward, voice steady. I believe the burden of proof is on you to show any wrongdoing. Charlotte's thriving. I won't let fear of social complications rob her of that progress. Denise took notes, then pressed her fingertips together. Given the statements and evidence, I propose we schedule a formal evaluation of Charlotte's home environment with a third-party child specialist. That professional can observe the household, interview Miss Santos, and speak privately with Charlotte. Would both parties agree to that? Howard looked at Patricia, then nodded. Yes, I'm willing. Lowry hesitated, but sensing the tide of professional procedure against him, eventually grunted his assent. Fine, he said. But I will reserve the right to proceed with legal action if this so-called evaluation suggests Charlotte's situation is not in her best interest. The mediator sketched a quick note. Then that's our next step. The session ended with no hugs or handshakes, just a cold sort of ceasefire. As Howard gathered his documents, he locked eyes with Lowry. There was no resolution, only a promise of deeper scrutiny. Still, Howard felt a spark of relief. A formal evaluation would highlight the positive changes in Charlotte's life, and maybe that would end this war. Yet as he walked out into the bright morning sun, he knew the hardest part might still lie ahead. Lowry wouldn't back down easily, and the future of his household and Charlotte's happiness remained on a precarious edge. A somber hush enveloped the mansion as Howard pulled into the driveway after the mediation. He stepped out of his car and stood for a moment, absorbing the subtle warmth of the afternoon light that glinted across the windows. For a fleeting second, he let himself recall a time before Caroline's death, when pulling into this driveway usually ended with Charlotte rushing out to greet him, Caroline smiling from the doorway. The memory felt like a distant echo. Inside, he found Louisa setting the table for an early dinner. She glanced up, searching his face for clues. "How did it go?" she asked quietly. Howard set his briefcase down and exhaled slowly. They agreed to have a child specialist evaluate our home environment. Lowry is still aiming to remove you from the picture, but there's no immediate legal order to do so. Louisa blinked, relief and anxiety mixing in her expression. So, we wait. He nodded, leaning against the back of a chair. Yes, we prepare for the evaluation. We'll be observed, interviewed, maybe tested. It sounds invasive, but if it proves Charlotte is safe and happy, it might finally put a stop to these threats. Charlotte emerged from the hallway, her face expectant. Howard managed a steady smile. We have some time before dinner, sweetheart. Want to show me your new routine?" She cast a brief look at Louisa, who nodded in encouragement. So Charlotte took his hand and led him to the living room, where she had set aside space for practice. The shifting furniture had become a familiar sight, an ottoman pushed to a corner, a small speaker perched on the coffee table. As classical music floated through the air, Charlotte attempted a sequence of small leaps. Her arms extended gracefully, though her eyes held a sliver of concern, as if she, too, sensed the household tension. When the final note played, she lowered her arms and looked to her father with a question in her gaze. "Am I doing enough?" Howard applauded softly. "That was lovely," he said. "Your form is getting better each day." Charlotte almost smiled, but something lingered behind her eyes. She whispered, "Daddy, is Grandpa still mad?" It took him a moment to respond. "He's worried about you. He doesn't understand that we're actually doing better now." Charlotte's voice trembled. "What if he makes you send Louisa away?" Howard knelt beside her. "No one is sending Louisa away," he promised, though a flicker of doubt gnawed at him. "We'll prove to everyone that this house is the best place for you." He hugged her, feeling the tightness in her small frame. Over Charlotte's shoulder, he glimpsed Louisa standing by the doorway, face etched with sympathetic worry. It struck him that they all carried fear in different ways, Charlotte in her uncertain questions, Louisa in her cautious stance, and he in his restless attempts to maintain control. Later that night, after Charlotte had gone to bed, Howard found himself in the study with Louisa, reviewing documents that Patricia had sent over. They outlined what a child specialist evaluation might entail: interviews about daily routines, observations of how Charlotte interacted with each adult, questions about moral upbringing, emotional support, and discipline styles. "What do we say if they ask about us?" Louisa asked softly, her brow furrowed. "I mean, about how we spend time, about dance, or if they suspect there's more than a professional relationship." Howard held her gaze. "We tell the truth, that we care about Charlotte. You're helping her heal. There's nothing improper about that." He paused, voice lowering. "Though sometimes I think about how grateful I am to have you here. I didn't realize how lonely we were until you brought light into the house." Louisa blushed, looking away. "I just want what's best for Charlotte," she said. "I never intended to complicate your life." "You haven't complicated it," Howard corrected gently. "You've helped us see what we were missing." Their eyes locked in a moment of unspoken understanding. Outside, the wind rustled through the garden, brushing leaves against the windows. It was the kind of small, cozy sound that could have felt comforting if not for the persistent knot of worry twisting in Howard's stomach. Yet even amid that anxiety, he sensed a deeper connection forming, one founded on mutual care and respect rather than any fleeting passion. Before heading to bed, Howard made his usual rounds, turning off lights, peeking into Charlotte's room, ensuring the doors were locked. Louisa retired to her suite upstairs, phone in hand, no doubt checking on her mother's condition in Brazil again. As the house fell into stillness, Howard couldn't sleep. He wandered into the dimly lit living room, remembering the dance steps Charlotte had shown him hours earlier. In the hush of midnight, he pictured Caroline's face, as though she were quietly approving Charlotte's newfound love of ballet. It felt like a night of reckoning, where every shadow in the house reminded him of the battles yet to come. And still, beneath the unease, there flickered a slender thread of hope. Charlotte was smiling more, connecting more deeply, and perhaps that evidence alone would stand firm against any accusations thrown their way. Over the course of the next week, a subtle shift in the mansion's atmosphere took shape. The usual hush was punctuated by the occasional arrival of professionals connected to the pending evaluation: a child therapist who interviewed Charlotte privately, a social worker who observed the household routines, and a general inspector who noted the safety measures of the home. Each visit felt invasive, yet Howard cooperated fully, determined to present the truth. In a small but poignant gesture, Howard rearranged the living room furniture so that Charlotte could practice her ballet without constantly having to push things aside. This new layout left an open space near the windows, where sunlight spilled across the floor each morning. To Louisa, it signaled more than convenience. It represented Howard's acceptance of dance as a permanent fixture in their lives. One afternoon, while Charlotte was at school, Howard and Louisa received a surprise visitor, Mrs. Delacroix, the psychologist who had been a friend to Caroline and a guiding figure for Charlotte. She had come to offer additional support, sensing the family might be on the brink of crisis. They gathered in the living room, where Mrs. Delacroix sat in an armchair, her grey hair pinned neatly. "I've been in touch with the child specialist conducting the evaluation," she said, folding her hands in her lap. "They asked for my input, given my history with Charlotte." Howard nodded, relieved. "Anything helps." Lowry's determined to find fault. Mrs. Delacroix's gaze flicked to Louisa, a gentle smile forming. "I've heard remarkable things about you, Miss Santos. Charlotte speaks very fondly of your time together. She mentioned that dancing helps her feel close to her mother. Did you know Caroline once considered taking ballet lessons as an adult, just for fun?" Louisa's eyes widened. "No, I didn't know that," she said softly. "That's quite special." Howard, struck by the reminder, remembered how Caroline once joked about learning to pirouette in her 30s. It had seemed such a whimsical notion at the time. Now it felt like fate that Charlotte found healing through the very activity her mother had admired. Mrs. Delacroix sighed, her tone turning serious. "Mr. Lowry is grieving in his own rigid way, but that doesn't excuse his actions. He may not believe it, but Caroline would have wanted Charlotte to find joy. I suspect he's interpreting this new joy as a betrayal of Caroline's memory." Howard's stomach clenched. "How do I convince him otherwise?" Mrs. Delacroix patted his hand. "Perhaps by showing him a reality he can't deny, how well Charlotte is doing. Words might not pierce his armor, but seeing her flourish might." After she left, Howard took a solitary walk through the garden. The roses were in bloom, adding bursts of color to the manicured green. He remembered the day he'd married Caroline here, with close friends and family celebrating their union. Richard Lowry had been more reserved, but didn't object to the match. Howard never imagined that same man would one day threaten him with a custody battle. Later, as twilight settled, Charlotte returned from school, brimming with excitement. "We practiced a short routine for the school's mini-show," she said, her eyes bright. "Ms. Channing says we can invite family." Howard felt a pang, wondering if Lowry would attend, or if that would only stoke more conflict. But he smiled for his daughter's sake. "That's wonderful news. I can't wait to see it." Louisa, who was making dinner, gave Charlotte an encouraging nod. "Can you show us a little preview after we eat?" Charlotte beamed. "Yes!" She hurried to wash up, her mood buoyant. When dinner was over, she changed into leggings and a t-shirt, then performed a snippet of her routine in the newly cleared living room space. The music played from Louisa's phone, a whimsical tune that underscored the innocence of childhood. Charlotte's steps were tentative, but filled with earnest effort. Her eyes lit up whenever she managed a graceful move, looking to Louisa or her father for approval. Howard and Louisa exchanged a glance, both proud and moved. Once Charlotte finished with a small bow, Howard couldn't help but clap. "You're incredible," he told her, trying not to let his voice betray the rush of emotion he felt. In that moment, It was impossible to deny the transformation that had occurred since Louisa's arrival. Where once Charlotte carried sorrow like a constant weight, she now walked with a cautious but unmistakable spark of confidence. That night, as Howard helped Charlotte get ready for bed, she hesitated at the doorway to her room. "Dad," she asked quietly, "do you think Mom can see me dance wherever she is?" A lump formed in Howard's throat. He remembered Caroline's laughter and gentle encouragement. "I believe she can," he said softly, "and she's very proud of you, just like I am." Charlotte's eyes glistened, and she stepped forward to hug him. For a brief second, all the tension, threats, and legal battles faded. This was what truly mattered: a child, healing through love and movement. Howard realized it was a moment of genuine change, not just for Charlotte, but for him as well. He had opened the doors of his heart, allowing the gentle echoes of the past to coexist with the promise of a brighter future. A crisp Saturday morning dawned, illuminating the mansion with a bright golden light. Howard stood in the kitchen, flipping through new emails from Patricia. The child specialist's evaluation date was set for the coming week. He felt a faint twinge of anxiety. This assessment could determine everything, from Charlotte's emotional trajectory to the outcome of Lowry's custody threats. He looked up to see Louisa enter the kitchen, carrying a small vase of fresh daisies. "Thought I'd brighten up the table," she said, setting them down with a cautious smile. "It's quiet this morning. Where's Charlotte?" Howard gestured toward the staircase. "Still asleep, I think. She was up late practicing some final tweaks to her mini-show routine." Louisa nodded, then busied herself tidying the countertops. The comfortable silence was broken by the buzz of Howard's phone. He answered, hearing Peter Hamilton's familiar voice on the line. "Morning," Peter said. "I just wanted to check in. How are you holding up before the evaluation?" Howard rubbed the bridge of his nose. "We're as ready as we can be. Charlotte's doing well at school and at home. She's practicing for that performance. I'm hoping the evaluator will see that she's in a healthy environment." Peter's tone was encouraging. "That's all you can do. Be honest and let them see what's really going on. I know it's nerve-wracking, but I believe you'll come out on top." After the call ended, Howard turned to find Charlotte trudging into the kitchen, hair mussed from sleep. She offered them both a sleepy smile. "Morning," she mumbled, giving Louisa a quick hug before sitting at the table. Over breakfast, they discussed plans for the day. Charlotte wanted to visit a local craft store to pick up fabric for a simple ballet skirt she was making for her performance. Louisa volunteered to take her, and Howard decided a few errands at the office might help distract him from the looming evaluation. By noon, father and daughter were in the car, heading first to Howard's office building so he could drop off some paperwork. The city streets bustled with weekend traffic, but Charlotte seemed animated, chatting about a detail in her routine. Howard savored her excitement, silently promising himself he'd protect that light in her eyes. They arrived at the sleek skyscraper downtown. "I'll be quick," Howard told Charlotte, leaving her in the car with Louisa. Up in his office, he sorted mail and responded to a few urgent emails. Just as he was about to depart, he spotted a file on Patricia's desk, notes on a planned approach for the child specialist's questions. He quickly thumbed through them, noticing segments emphasizing Charlotte's mental health, her daily routines, and the supportive environment with Louisa. Satisfied, he returned to the parking garage. But as he neared the car, he froze. A familiar figure, Richard Lowry, stood on the sidewalk a few yards away. Lowry appeared to have just stepped out of a luxury sedan, speaking on his cell phone with a tight expression. Howard immediately tensed, worried Lowry might spot Charlotte or approach them. Slipping into the driver's seat, he kept his voice low. "Stay calm," he told Louisa, who looked alarmed by the sight of Lowry pacing on the sidewalk. Charlotte peered through the window, eyes widening. To Howard's relief, Lowry seemed too engrossed in his phone call to notice them. Howard started the engine and drove away smoothly. Charlotte exhaled a shaky breath, sensing the tension. "Why is Grandpa here?" she asked, voice wavering. Howard forced a calm tone. "Probably business in the same building. It's okay." Yet the run-in left him unsettled. He couldn't shake the idea that Lowry was deliberately hovering, keeping tabs on him. Leaning on the steering wheel, he reminded himself that the best weapon against any suspicion was transparency. The upcoming evaluation might be intrusive, but it would also serve as undeniable proof of how well Charlotte was doing. They arrived at the craft store, where rows of colorful fabrics, ribbons, and art supplies lined the shelves. Charlotte's mood lifted as she studied shimmering tulle and pastel satin. She and Louisa deliberated over swatches, discussing which shade best complemented her skin tone. Howard observed, hands in his pockets, a small smile tugging at his lips. It felt normal, like a father and child picking out a fun accessory rather than huddling in the shadow of legal threats. Back home, Charlotte insisted on cutting the fabric right away, eager to begin stitching. Louisa gently guided her through the steps, letting her choose the pattern. Howard took a seat on the sofa, watching them bend over the table in focused collaboration. The hush in the room wasn't tense this time. It was peaceful, accented only by the snip of scissors and the rustle of cloth. In the back of his mind, he knew the real battle lay ahead. The evaluation approached, and Lowry hadn't softened his stance. Nonetheless, seeing Charlotte's budding confidence and Louisa's patient guidance fortified Howard's resolve. Whatever final showdown he faced, he would face it armed with the truth that love, care, and acceptance were transforming his daughter's life. And no court document or sour-faced grandfather could dispute the radiance of a child rediscovering her laughter. The day of the official evaluation arrived in a swirl of nerves. Howard woke early, pacing by the living room windows as dawn's light crept through the sheer curtains. Over breakfast, Charlotte asked endless questions: who the evaluator was, how long the visit would last, whether she should show her dance moves. Louisa, sensing Charlotte's apprehension, reassured her with calm, soothing answers. By mid-morning, a car pulled into the driveway. A poised, middle-aged woman stepped out, carrying a leather satchel and a notebook. She introduced herself as Dr. Miriam Rowe, the child specialist appointed to review Charlotte's living environment. With short grey hair and kind, dark eyes, Dr. Rowe moved with a quiet confidence. Howard led her through the foyer into the living room. Charlotte lingered behind, gripping Louisa's hand. Dr. Rowe gave them a polite smile. "Thank you for welcoming me. My goal is to observe how Charlotte interacts in her home and to speak individually with each of you. This is not about passing judgment. It's about understanding family dynamics." Though her words were reassuring, Howard felt anxiety coil in his stomach. He gestured for Dr. Rowe to sit on the sofa while he took an adjacent armchair. Charlotte hovered near the bookshelf, uncertain. Louisa stood quietly by a window. Dr. Rowe began by asking simple questions: how Charlotte's day was structured, who helped with homework, how emotional support was offered. Howard explained their routines, emphasizing the improvements in Charlotte's self-expression since Louisa's arrival. He tried to keep his voice steady, mindful of every detail. Occasionally, Dr. Rowe made notes, humming in acknowledgement. At one point, she turned to Charlotte. "I hear you've been learning to dance. Could you tell me about that?" Charlotte glanced at Louisa, who offered an encouraging nod. Taking a small breath, Charlotte said, I like it because it helps me not be scared. Sometimes I miss my mom, and dancing makes me feel like I can remember good things instead of sad things." Howard felt a stirring in his chest at Charlotte's bravery in articulating her feelings. Dr. Rowe smiled gently. "That's a lovely sentiment. Would you like to show me a bit of what you've learned? Only if you're comfortable." Charlotte's gaze flicked to Howard for permission. He managed a smile and gave a nod. She stepped into the open space near the window, hesitating momentarily before assuming a simple first position. Louisa activated a soft piece of piano music on her phone, and Charlotte began her small routine. Delicate, uncertain steps, arms sweeping gracefully. Though not perfectly executed, her focus was clear, each movement echoing a deeper sense of confidence. When the music stopped, Charlotte performed a shy curtsy. Dr. Rowe clapped softly, eyes warm with approval. "Thank you, Charlotte. That was beautiful. Do you practice often with Miss Santos?" Charlotte nodded. "She shows me new moves. She was a ballerina in Brazil." "Interesting," Dr. Rowe remarked, jotting something in her notebook. "And how do you feel when you're dancing with her?" Charlotte glanced at Louisa again. "Safe," she said simply. For a moment, the room felt charged with emotion. Howard swallowed against the lump in his throat, seeing the faint shine of tears in Louisa's eyes. Dr. Rowe shifted her focus to Louisa. "I'd like to speak with you in private, if that's all right. Sometimes it's easier for the child to relax without extra adults present." Howard offered a small nod, and Louisa followed Dr. Rowe to a quieter corner. Howard stayed with Charlotte, distracting her by asking about her next school assignment. He couldn't hear everything Dr. Rowe asked, but he caught snippets, questions about Louisa's role, her intentions, how she disciplined Charlotte, if at all. Louisa's voice remained calm, each response composed despite the personal nature of the questions. Next, Dr. Rowe interviewed Howard alone, verifying timelines, discussing Caroline's passing, and delving into his reasons for hiring Louisa. He explained that his daughter's withdrawal after her mother's death had left him seeking someone who could truly engage her. Dr. Rowe then asked about the allegations of any romantic involvement. Howard answered firmly, clarifying that his relationship with Louisa was rooted in respect, gratitude, and mutual care for Charlotte, not romance. Finally, Dr. Rowe requested a few moments with Charlotte in her bedroom, an environment she might feel comfortable expressing herself freely. Howard hovered in the hallway, heart racing. He heard a few muffled exchanges, Charlotte's soft voice recounting her daily life, the mention of dancing, reading, and occasionally talking about her mom. After nearly 2 hours, Dr. Rowe reconvened with them in the living room. "Thank you for your time," she said, standing with her satchel. "I'll compile my observations into a report that will go to the court and Mr. Lowry's counsel. I can't share conclusions yet, but I will say that Charlotte appears well-adjusted and happy. Keep doing what you're doing." Relief flooded Howard's veins, though he contained it behind a composed nod. "Thank you, Dr. Rowe," he murmured. Once she departed, Charlotte turned to her father. "Did I say the right things?" Howard pulled her into a gentle hug. "You were honest. That's all that matters." Louisa hovered by the window, the sunlight illuminating her hair in a soft halo. Howard met her gaze, a sense of unspoken gratitude passing between them. For now, they had done all they could. They had faced the evaluator's scrutiny, laid bare their family life, and shown the genuine bond that had grown here. Whether Richard Lowry would accept the findings remained uncertain. But in this moment, the tension in the household eased, replaced by a cautious optimism. They had confronted the storm. Now came the waiting, the reflection, and the hope that truth would prevail over suspicion. Howard awoke to the soft hum of the air conditioner and the faint glow of early morning, peeking through the bedroom drapes. For the first time in months, he hadn't tossed and turned all night, worrying about Lowry's threats or the child evaluation that had consumed their lives. The final report from Dr. Rowe had come in the previous afternoon, and the verdict was clear. Charlotte was in a supportive environment that fostered her emotional recovery. There was no evidence to suggest an inappropriate relationship between Howard and Louisa or any detriment to Charlotte's well-being. He let out a long breath, as though he had been holding it since the day Louisa first arrived. While Lowry still had the legal right to contest the findings, the evaluation held considerable weight. Howard's attorney, Patricia, was optimistic that even if his father-in-law pursued further action, he'd have little success. Howard clung to that hope like a buoy in deep waters. Making his way downstairs, he found Louisa and Charlotte in the kitchen, their quiet voices punctuated by the sound of clinking plates. Charlotte's face lit up when she saw him, rushing over to wrap her arms around his waist. "Daddy, did you sleep okay?" she asked, peering up at him with earnest concern. He smoothed her hair gently. "Best sleep I've had in a while. And you?" Charlotte nodded. "I'm so glad Dr. Rowe said I get to stay here with you and Louisa." "But what about Grandpa?" Howard exchanged a look with Louisa, who offered a reassuring nod. He crouched down to meet Charlotte's gaze. "I spoke with my lawyer and Dr. Rowe. They both believe your grandpa may still disagree, but he doesn't have much of a case anymore. If he wants to keep fighting, we'll handle it together." Charlotte nodded, relief dancing in her eyes. "Okay." After breakfast, the atmosphere in the house felt oddly weightless. For weeks, they had braced themselves for conflict. Now, while not entirely gone, the tension had loosened its grip. In the living room, the furniture remained arranged to accommodate Charlotte's dance routine, and she used the open space to practice small sequences throughout the day. With the final hurdles of custody challenges receding, her posture seemed even freer, as if a silent burden had been lifted from her slender shoulders. Howard knew, however, that one more confrontation still loomed, a conversation with Richard Lowry. Despite the evaluation's clear findings, Lowry had remained conspicuously silent. Howard suspected that his father-in-law was wrestling with pride and disappointment, unsure how to proceed after the expert report invalidated his claims. Sooner or later, they'd have to talk. Late that afternoon, as he pored over real estate paperwork in the study, Howard's phone buzzed. The display showed Lowry's name. Tensing, he hit the green button and lifted the phone to his ear. "What is it?" Howard asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Lowry's tone was subdued. "I received Dr. Rowe's report." He paused, inhaling audibly. "I'd like to see Charlotte, this evening if possible, alone." Howard glanced toward the door, thinking of the times Lowry had shown up unannounced. This request, couched in a subdued tone, was unexpected. "Why alone?" he asked carefully. A tired sigh emerged on the other end. "Because I'd like to speak with her without feeling like I'm under a microscope. I owe her an explanation, and I'd rather not cause a scene." Howard mulled it over. Despite everything, Lowry was still Charlotte's grandfather. They shared a connection to Caroline that couldn't be dismissed. "I'll ask her," he said finally. "If she's okay with it, I'll bring her to your house." "But I'm staying nearby." Lowry offered no protest, simply murmuring a curt, "Fine," before ending the call. Howard found Charlotte in the living room, rummaging through her ballet bag. At the mention of a visit to her grandfather, she bit her lip. "Will Louisa come too?" "He asked to talk to you alone," Howard said softly. "But I'll be right outside. It's up to you." Charlotte stood silent for a moment, then exhaled. "Okay, I'll go." When Howard told Louisa about it, she frowned with concern, but respected Charlotte's decision. It might help them both heal in their own way, she conceded, though her voice quivered slightly. That evening, Howard drove Charlotte across the city to Lowry's stately home. a large property with stone pillars and an imposing front gate. Memories of past gatherings, family dinners and celebrations with Caroline bubbled up, mingling with the strain of recent events. He pulled the car up a long, winding driveway. When they arrived, Charlotte asked him to walk her to the door. He agreed, but promised he would wait outside while she and Lowry talked. The door swung open to reveal Lowry, looking older than Howard remembered. Shadows lined his face, and the usual sternness around his eyes seemed softened. He nodded a brief greeting to Howard, then focused on Charlotte. "Come in, child," he said, stepping aside. "Let's talk in the sitting room." Charlotte peered back at Howard, who gently squeezed her shoulder. "I'll wait just out here," he reminded her. She nodded, then followed Lowry inside. Through the threshold, Howard caught sight of a dimly lit hallway leading into a large sitting area, walls decorated with pictures of Caroline in happier times. He glimpsed one photo of Caroline, young and vibrant, holding an infant Charlotte. A pang of loss coursed through him. As the door closed, Howard stepped off to the side, hands buried in his coat pockets. He told himself to trust Charlotte's instincts. Though Lowry's anger had threatened their family, he was still a grieving father who had lost his daughter. Perhaps, finally, he was ready to see past his pain. Howard stood outside for what felt like an eternity, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. The crisp evening air pricked at his cheeks. He stared at the ornate facade of Richard Lowry's home, memories swirling. Caroline's sweet laughter echoing in the foyer during holiday visits, the clinking of crystal glasses at fancy dinner parties. Tonight, there was only silence. Finally, after nearly an hour, the door opened. Charlotte emerged, her eyes red-rimmed but composed. Lowry stood behind her, a hesitant form in the doorway. Howard's heart hammered. He hurried over, kneeling to meet Charlotte's gaze. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Charlotte sniffled, then nodded. He apologized," she whispered, glancing back at her grandfather. "He said he was sorry for making things so hard. That he just didn't know how to let me, and you, move on without Mom." Howard looked up at Lowry, unsure what to expect. The older man's features were tight, a faint regret flickering behind his eyes. "I won't lie," Lowry said in a lowered tone. "I still feel unsettled about everything, about you hiring that young woman, about the rumors, but I can see I overreacted. Charlotte's well-being is what matters most." Howard rose, standing at a polite distance. "That's all I ever wanted, to do what's best for her." Lowry's gaze shifted to Charlotte, who clutched a small handkerchief in her fist. "When Caroline died," he said softly, "it felt like losing the only child I had. I couldn't bear the idea of her memory being overshadowed. I thought if Charlotte was dancing, smiling, that meant Caroline was forgotten. That was foolish of me." Charlotte blinked back fresh tears. "Dancing makes me feel close to Mom," she said. Not farther away." Something in Lowry's stern demeanor cracked, and he nodded, averting his eyes as though to hide emotion. Howard gently placed a hand on Charlotte's shoulder. "We should get going, but thank you for talking with her." Lowry offered a stiff nod. "Send me details about her school performance," he said. "Perhaps I'll come watch, if that's appropriate." A week ago, the suggestion would have seemed impossible. Now, the tentative offer hung in the cold air as a small olive branch. Howard silently nodded his agreement and guided Charlotte to the car. The ride home was quiet, both of them processing the encounter. Charlotte eventually dozed off, her head lolling against the window. By the time they pulled into the mansion's driveway, the moon was high. Howard carried the sleeping child inside, upstairs to her bedroom. He gently laid her down, tucking the blankets around her. Before leaving, he paused by her bedside, feeling gratitude for the small reconciliation that had taken place. Downstairs, he found Louisa waiting in the living room, perched on the edge of the sofa. She stood when he entered, eyes filled with questions. "How did it go?" Howard exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "He apologized," he said, still somewhat astonished. "I think he realizes now that Charlotte's happiness doesn't dishonor Caroline's memory." Louisa's shoulders relaxed, relief evident in her posture. "That's wonderful news. It sounds like he might step back from the custody threats." Howard sank onto the sofa, patting the cushion beside him. "I believe so. He even asked about attending Charlotte's school performance." Louisa's eyes shone. She lowered herself to sit, crossing her hands in her lap. "I'm so glad. Charlotte was worrying so much." They sat in a comforting hush, the long weeks of tension slowly receding like a dark tide. Howard thought back to the day he'd first hired Louisa, the wariness he'd felt at letting someone new into his meticulously organized world. Now, he recognized that her presence had offered more than housekeeping or childcare. She had brought warmth where grief once resided. After a few moments, Louisa spoke. "Howard, there's something else." She hesitated, then continued in a measured tone. "My mother's been responding to treatments better than expected. My cousin says she's much improved. I may not need to return to Brazil after all." His chest filled with relief. "That's wonderful. I know that's been weighing on you." She nodded, a thoughtful crease forming between her brows. "Still, I wonder if there's a way to visit her soon, just to make sure she's truly stable. I wouldn't want to leave Charlotte for too long, but then we'll figure something out," he interjected gently. "If you can't go for a long trip, we can arrange for a short one. I want you to have peace of mind about your mother." Louisa's lips curved into a grateful smile. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice laced with emotion. The two of them lingered there, the hush of the house broken only by the faint ticking of a nearby clock. Howard couldn't help but reflect on how different everything felt compared to just a few weeks ago. Rather than dread for the future, a cautious optimism now rooted itself in each passing day. There were still wounds to heal, broken trust, old grief, but a renewed sense of possibility had taken hold. That night, he went to bed with a quiet resolve. He'd set aside fear and doubt, focusing instead on maintaining the stability and hope that Charlotte, and indeed all of them, had discovered. With Lowry no longer casting such a menacing shadow, the mansion felt like a different place, one that Caroline herself might recognize if she looked down upon them, smiling at how love had re-entered these walls in the most unexpected way. In the days following the reconciliation with Richard Lowry, the mansion seemed to glow with a new energy. The staff, once cautious in their interactions, offered friendlier greetings. Delivery drivers who brought groceries sensed the lighter atmosphere. Even Peter Hamilton dropped by, remarking on how everyone appeared more at ease. Howard, too, noticed changes within himself. He no longer woke each morning to a jolt of stress over potential custody battles. Instead, he found renewed focus on his real estate business, handling deals with a calm he'd forgotten he possessed. Yet, his home life remained at the forefront of his thoughts, particularly Charlotte's upcoming school performance. That sunny Thursday afternoon, Charlotte practiced in the living room, the final touches of her small ballet routine set to a gentle tune. Louisa supervised, occasionally offering suggestions, "Lift your chin just a little," or "Keep your arms rounded." Howard, pretending to read over a file, watched from the couch. He felt a swell of pride with each graceful step Charlotte managed. When she finished, Charlotte dashed to him, breathless and pink-cheeked. "How was it?" she asked, eyes shining with excitement. He smiled broadly. "You were amazing. I can't wait to see you on stage." A hint of uncertainty flickered in her gaze. "Do you think Grandpa will really come?" Recalling Lowry's invitation, Howard nodded. "He said he would. I think he wants to support you." Charlotte nodded, a shy smile tugging at her lips. "Okay." Over the next few days, family and friends received official notices about the mini-performance. Just a small number from Howard's circle, along with the usual crowd of parents. Ms. Channing even invited a local community newspaper to cover the event, highlighting how the school encouraged students to explore the arts. Meanwhile, Louisa prepared for a brief visit to Brazil, coordinating a round-trip ticket that would let her check on her mother for a week. Seeing her relieved about her mother's improved health provided a quiet sense of closure for the entire household. One evening, as Louisa packed a small suitcase, Howard lingered in the doorway of her room, arms folded comfortably. "I'll make sure everything runs smoothly here," he said, voice reassuring. "Charlotte will miss you, but she'll manage until you get back." Louisa zipped her bag and turned, gratitude shining in her eyes. "You've already done so much to accommodate me." "I promise I'll be back in time for Charlotte's big performance." Howard nodded, pushing down the subtle pang of realization that he would miss her presence, even if only briefly. "Have a safe trip," he said quietly. "We'll be waiting." Charlotte took Louisa's departure well, though she admitted she felt like something's missing in the house. Howard filled the extra time by helping Charlotte rehearse, though he was no dance expert. They ended up laughing when he tried to mimic a pirouette and nearly lost his balance. During that week, Lowry surprised everyone by calling Howard to ask if he could visit Charlotte for an afternoon. Though Howard remained cautious, he agreed, and the meeting went smoothly. Lowry's stiffness around the house softened when he saw Charlotte's enthusiastic practice session. He even managed a few rare smiles, nodding as she explained each step. As the days progressed, Charlotte's excitement about the performance buzzed throughout the home. She taped her practice schedule to the fridge, marking off each day with neat check marks. Howard found himself marveling at her transformation, recalling the solemn child who had once resisted even the smallest social activity. Now, she actively sought out a spotlight, albeit a gentle one. Louisa returned from Brazil just in time for the final rehearsal. Howard picked her up from the airport, noticing her weary but relieved expression. She spoke of her mother's stable condition and how comforting it had been to see her in person. Once at home, she raced to greet Charlotte, hugging the girl tightly and inquiring about every detail she'd missed. That weekend, on the morning of the performance, the household awoke early. Charlotte donned a simple ballet outfit, a pastel skirt she'd fashioned with Louisa's guidance, and matching ballet slippers. She twirled nervously in front of the mirror, smoothing out non-existent wrinkles. Howard and Louisa gathered near the front door, waiting for Charlotte to finish her last-minute preparations. A black car pulled into the driveway, Lowry's chauffeur-driven sedan. Howard peered out the window, heart fluttering with uncertainty. Louisa exchanged a glance with him, both wondering if Lowry could truly set aside old grievances for a child's moment of joy. Charlotte rushed downstairs, eyes lighting up when she heard the car. "Grandpa came," she whispered, excitement and nervousness blending in her voice. Soon enough, they were all on their way to the school auditorium, with Lowry's car following behind. Though the tension of past weeks lingered at the edges, an undeniable sense of unity hovered as well. Once they arrived, the small group entered the modest auditorium, where rows of fold-out chairs and a simple wooden stage waited for the young performers. The air hummed with parental chatter and children's muffled giggles backstage. Howard and Louisa found seats in the front row, leaving a chair for Lowry next to them. The older man sat down, face reserved, but he gave Charlotte a nod of encouragement when she peeked out from behind the stage curtain. For Howard, The moment felt surreal. They were all here. Father, grandfather, caretaker, each with a unique piece of Caroline's memory close to their hearts. The lights dimmed. With a quiet hush, the audience settled, and Howard took a slow breath, preparing to watch his daughter take a step into the spotlight she had once feared. A hush settled over the school auditorium. Bright stage lights illuminated the modest set, a painted backdrop of pastel clouds and a few cardboard columns vaguely resembling castle pillars. Parents, siblings, and friends filled the rows of fold-out chairs. Somewhere toward the back, a local reporter snapped occasional photos, whispering into a small recorder. In the front row, Howard's heart raced as Charlotte and her classmates stepped on stage. She stood near the center, wearing the pastel ballet skirt that she and Louisa had carefully stitched. Her hair was tied back in a neat bun, a small flower pinned to the side. She glanced out at the audience, eyes searching until they landed on Howard, Louisa, and, astonishingly, her grandfather, Richard Lowry. The brief flicker of reassurance in her expression made Howard's throat tighten with emotion. A gentle piano melody began to play through the auditorium's speakers, and the children moved into their positions. Charlotte's routine was a simple progression of steps, pliés, relevés, graceful arm movements, yet it carried a quiet elegance. Howard remembered how she once trembled at the idea of speaking in front of the class. Now she danced with a newfound poise, her face reflective of a calm determination that years of silence had masked. As she performed, Howard stole a glance at Lowry, who leaned forward, hands clasped. Though the older man's expression remained guarded, his eyes shimmered with what looked like quiet awe. Beside him, Louisa watched intently, a gentle smile on her lips. Even in the dim auditorium lighting, Howard noticed her eyes shining with pride. The dance ended with a soft flourish, Charlotte lowering her arms in a final pose. Applause erupted. Although it was just one number in a small school showcase, to Howard, it felt like a triumphant culmination of everything Charlotte had endured and overcome since Caroline's passing. He clapped until his hands stung. When the entire class finished their bows and exited, the lights came up. Parents began moving toward the backstage area to greet their children. Howard, Louisa, and Lowry followed the small throng of adults. They found Charlotte surrounded by a few other dancers, exchanging excited chatter about how well everything had gone. "There's my star," Howard teased gently, kneeling down. "You were amazing." Charlotte laughed, cheeks glowing from exertion. "I was so nervous, but then I remembered Mom always said it's okay to have butterflies. I just breathed and danced." Louisa gave her a warm hug. "You shined out there." She pulled a small bouquet of daisies from her bag, handing them to Charlotte, a little something to say, "Well done." Charlotte's eyes sparkled with gratitude, and she leaned in to hug Louisa before turning to her grandfather. Lowry cleared his throat, holding out a box wrapped in lavender paper. "I wasn't sure what you'd want, but I thought a small gift might be appropriate." "Good job, Charlotte." With trembling fingers, she unwrapped the box to reveal a delicate silver necklace, a tiny ballet slipper charm dangling from the chain. Her eyes welled up as she whispered, "Thank you, Grandpa." A hushed moment passed as Lowry gently placed the necklace around Charlotte's neck. Howard sensed the raw emotions in the gesture, an unspoken acknowledgement that he was proud of her, that perhaps he had misunderstood the role dance could play in healing. After the immediate commotion died down, Ms. Channing, the principal, came by with the local reporter, a woman in her early 30s. The reporter took a couple of quick photos of Charlotte and her classmates, scribbling notes about the positive influence of arts education. Howard stood back, letting Charlotte have her moment in the spotlight. Eventually, the group made their way outside. A soft evening breeze replaced the stuffy auditorium air. The parking lot bustled with families congratulating their children. Under the glow of street lamps, Howard found himself next to Lowry, who seemed uncharacteristically quiet. "She did wonderfully," Lowry said, his tone subdued. "She did," Howard agreed, nodding. "Thank you for coming." They fell silent, the hum of nearby conversations forming a backdrop. Finally, Lowry turned to face Howard. "I can't pretend I approve of everything that happened. Your decisions, the tabloids, all of that. But it's clear Charlotte is thriving. I was wrong to push for custody." Howard released a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "I'm grateful to hear that." Lowry looked toward Charlotte, who was busy showing her necklace to Louisa. "My daughter would be proud, I think," he said quietly. "She would," Howard agreed, voice thick with emotion. "Caroline wanted Charlotte to find a way to live fully again. I believe we've helped her do that." Nearby, Charlotte glanced over, beckoning them. Howard and Lowry closed the short distance. Without hesitation, Charlotte linked one arm through her grandfather's and the other through her father's. She cast a content smile toward Louisa, who joined them, falling into step as they walked through the parking lot. The scene felt both ordinary and extraordinary, a family patched together by loss and rediscovered hope. That night, back at the mansion, Charlotte went to bed almost immediately, exhausted from the day's excitement. Howard and Louisa found themselves lingering in the living room, the furniture still set up for dance practice. Outside, the moonlit garden shimmered. A soft piano melody played from Louisa's phone, filling the quiet spaces once haunted by grief. "You've given my daughter something I couldn't," Howard said, voice hushed in the gentle light, "a way to express herself. I don't know how to thank you." Louisa's eyes shone, reflecting the soft lamplight. "You already have, by letting me be part of this family." He reached out, taking a steady breath. Though life remained complex, with old wounds not fully healed, this moment felt like standing on the brink of a new chapter. He gently took her hand, and they stood in silence, heartbeats steady, a silent acknowledgement that what once had been a house of sorrow was now filled with the hum of a life reclaimed. Upstairs, Charlotte slept peacefully, a ballet slipper charm resting on her collarbone.